Chapter 207. The battle in front of Mist College came to an end, but the disturbance caused by it didn't stop. Many practitioners gathered in groups of 3 or 4 and talked about the sudden battle just now. Even their eyes on Lin Sun became strange. Lin Sun was sitting alone on a stone step beside the square at this time. He seemed to be unaware of so many gazes and was lost in thought. In the battle just now, Lin Sun experienced for the first time the difference of human gang realms' combat effectiveness. Needless to say, attacking people from a distance made the battle more dangerous and unpredictable. To Lin Sun's surprise, when he operated Windstorm Millstone, the power released was completely beyond his expectation. In a normal state, Lin Sun's gang spirit was extremely pure, as clean as crystal glass, and its quality was extraordinary. This made Lin Sun's fighting power extremely strong in the battle, and when he operated the Windstorm Millstone, his fighting power skyrocketed on the basis of this. That was what surprised Lin Sun. Thinking carefully about the battle just now, Lin Sun soon realized that driven by the Windstorm Millstone, his gang spirit showed a unique way of running, like a spring that was compressed to the limit, possessing a kind of terrible explosive force. And this power was released in the form of a storm vortex, like a sharp cone that spiraled at full speed, which was far more lethal than in a normal state. Maybe this is the magical effect of Pond of Spiritual Power. The reason why there are different grades of Pond of Spiritual Power is that the power it can possess is completely different. Lin Sun was lost in thought. His Pond of Spiritual Power was indeed very special. It was extremely unique and mysterious, very different from the ordinary first-grade Pond of Spiritual Power. There was even a mysterious echo between the Pond of Spiritual Power and the spiritual vortex on the 4 acupoints of cardiac vessel. How could it be compared with ordinary ones? In this world, human gang realm practitioners who could condense second-grade Pond of Spiritual Power were all regarded as first-class figures, and those who could have first-grade Pond of Spiritual Power were the top figures in the world. And Lin Sun's Pond of Spiritual Power was even better than that of first-grade Pond of Spiritual Power. People like him were doomed to be unable to be measured by secular standard. Not long after, it was time to sign up for the province test. With a melodious bell ringing, the closed gate of Mist College slowly opened. For a moment, all the people waiting on the white jade square were refreshed and rushed to Mist College like a tide. Lin Sun also woke up from his meditation. He stood up, took the certificate of county test that he had prepared long ago, and walked forward with the crowd. All of a sudden, a plainly dressed young man with an outstanding bearing approached him and said in a low voice, "I'm Chao Yunxiu from the Green Maple County's Taihang Prefecture. Nice to meet you, young master." Lin Sun was stunned and asked, "What's the matter, my friend?" Chao Yunxiu said with slight admiration, "Just now, I saw a young master attack out of rage and ruthlessly crush the prestige of those rich and powerful disciples. It's truly admirable. Imperceptibly, it's equivalent to avenging the resentment of us poor disciples." Lin Sun raised his eyebrows and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't do that just for the poor." Lin Sun's attitude was a little cold. As soon as Chao Yunxiu opened his mouth, he categorized him as a poor disciple, which made Lin Sun very uncomfortable. It was not that he looked down upon the poor, but he hated to be divided into camps in this way. Chao Yunxiu was obviously stunned and said, "Young master, several friends and I have seen what you did just now. In my opinion, we have a lot in common. If we can become friends, we don't need to act according to the mood of those rich and powerful disciples in the future with the strength we have gathered." Lin Sun frowned. "What on earth do you want to say?" Chao Yunxiu took a deep breath and glanced around. Seeing that no one was paying attention to them, he lowered his voice and said, "I've established a Qingyun society with some like-minded friends. The purpose is to unite the peers who also have first-class cultivation talents but are born in poverty. We can help each other and make progress on the road of cultivation together. I wonder if you are interested in joining us?" Lin soon realized that this guy actually came to rope him in. Sorry, I'm not interested, Lin soon said and walked forward. He had no interest in participating in the Green Cloud Society or the Alliance of Poor Disciples. Chao Yunxiu was stunned. Looking at Lin soon walking away, he looked a little gloomy. Brother Chao, how is it? Someone came over and asked. How else can it be? Our Green Cloud Society can't attract such a person. Chao Yunxiu laughed at himself. Humph, this guy is too arrogant. He obviously comes from the same family as us. Does he look down on us? That person snorted. Chao Yunxiu smiled and said calmly, You can't say that. He may have his own considerations, but I believe that when our Green Cloud Society really rises, he will definitely regret today's decision. That person said with slight admiration, Brother Chao, only a broad-minded person like you can lead us to rise together. Chao Yunxiu laughed and said, Let's go and sign up first. This province test is the first step for our Green Cloud Society to rise. In the future, our Green Cloud Society is destined to have a place in the layout of the empire. Brother Dongtu, what do you think of the little guy just now? In the distance of the White Jade Square, a middle-aged man in a white robe watched the group of young practitioners enter Mist College and suddenly asked aloud. Very good. He is a rare genius. Next to him, a man with a straight posture and a wide-sleeved black robe nodded. His eyebrows were sparse and his eyes were cold. Standing there casually, he had a kind of imposing manner. If there were big shots in Mist City here, they would definitely recognize that the middle-aged man in a white robe was Wei Lingzhen, the dean of Mist College, a great practitioner with unfathomable cultivation who was famous in Southwest Province. Next to Wei Lingzhen was Du Dongtu, the commander of the Xiling army of the empire stationed in Southwest Province. In terms of power and status in Southwest Province, only Governor Lu Wujuan could compete with him. Wei Lingzhen said with a smile, Ha ha, to be called a prodigy by Brother Dongtu, it is enough to prove that this child is extraordinary. I just don't know which family he is from, I have never heard of his name before. Du Dongtu thought for a moment and said, This boy is certainly not from a noble family. With his current performance, I would like to recruit him into the Xiling army. With the strength he just showed, he is destined to shine in the future. Wei Lingzhen was speechless and said, Brother Dongtu, you are tempted. But in my opinion, this boy is unscrupulous. It seems that he is very glorious just now, but in fact, he has offended a lot of people. This approach seems too reckless. Du Dongtu disapproved and said, A young man should have the courage of a tiger and a wolf. If this boy had endured and given in just now, I would have looked down on him. Wei Lingzhen finally concluded that Du Dongtu really liked this boy. He couldn't help laughing and said, Unfortunately, according to his temperament, I am afraid that he will not join the army. In his eyes, perhaps it is more tempting to participate in the nation test. Du Dongtu frowned and said, If so, I can't do anything about it. Wei Lingzhen said, As far as I know, there are a lot of outstanding people participating in the province test. In terms of strength, they are not inferior to this boy at all. Du Dongtu nodded and asked with interest, Who? Wei Lingzhen said, For example, Xu Shaolin, Yuan Jing, Lu Jiao and Yun Zitong of our Mist College are all top-notch in the human gang realm. And Lu Qianhuan, the youngest daughter of Lu Wujuan of the governor's mansion, is also extraordinary. After a pause, he continued, It is said that Lian Fei, the son-in-law of Yao Tuahai, a great practitioner, is also extremely outstanding. These are the outstanding talents of the young generation. In addition to them, there are still many powerful figures that have not been discovered, just like the boy just now. Maybe when the province test begins, we can see how many dark horses will jump out. Du Dongtu nodded, I'd like to see it when the province test begins. Wei Lingzhen said with a smile, Of course. This time, Governor Lu Wujuan is the main examiner, and you and I are all witnesses. With our eyesight we can select the real top figures from them. Lin Sun didn't know that he had already received the attention of Wei Lingjun, the president of Mist College, and Du Dongtu, the commander of Xiling Army, before the registration for the province test began. At this time, he was queuing up to the registration office. He handed in the state test certificate and paid a fee of 10 imperial silver coins, and then received a token representing the participation in the province test. Then, Lin Sun didn't stay and turned away directly. The person in charge of issuing the token was a teacher in charge of Mist College, a middle-aged man with a serious look named Liu Zizheng. When Lin Sun left, Liu Zizheng took out the state test certificate handed in by Lin Sun, looked at it carefully for a moment, and put it back quietly. Donglin Town, Lin Sun, 14 years old. It should be him. After thinking for a moment, Liu Zizheng called a teacher in charge to help with the registration, and then he got up and left in a hurry. After half an hour, in front of a magnificent palace in Mist City, Liu Zizheng took out a letter and handed it to an old servant who guarded the palace. "Give it to your master, and tell him that the person he is looking for has appeared." After that, Liu Zizheng turned around and left. A moment later, the letter fell into the hands of the owner of the palace. Lin Sun. I didn't expect that he really appeared. The owner of the palace was a beautiful girl. She took the letter and read it, and her face showed a touch of excitement. "Susu, who did you say appeared?" On one side of the palace, a teenager who was meditating behind closed doors suddenly opened his eyes, and a cold light burst out from his eyes. "It's Lin Sun. He signed up for the province test today." The girl waved the letter in her hand, and her face lit up with joy. "Brother Fei, you can finally get revenge." The youth stood up and snatched the letter. He flipped through it briefly, and his expression became excited and even slightly ferocious. "Lin Sun, it's been a whole year. You finally showed up. It's time to put an end to the hatred between us." With a crack, the letter was crushed into powder, and the teenager's eyes showed a touch of unforgettable hatred. Chapter 208. For a whole year, Lian Fei never forgot Lin Sun, the enemy who killed his father. For revenge, he never slacked off in the past year and spent almost all his time improving his strength. With the help and support of Yao Tuahai, a great practitioner, Lian Fei obtained a lot of cultivation resources and made rapid progress in cultivation. When he reached the human gang realm, he even condensed the second-class pond of spiritual power, which shocked Green Maple County and made him known as a cultivation genius. It was also at that time that Yao Tuahai finally agreed to betroth Yao Susu to Lian Fei, making Lian Fei the son-in-law of the Yao clan. His status and identity had undergone an earth-shaking change, and it was incomparable to before. Life should be happy, but Lian Fei was not happy at all, because his enemy who killed his father was not dead yet. Now, after a year, when he finally got the news of Lin Sun's appearance, the long-suppressed hatred in Lian Fei's heart was completely ignited. "Susu, he is in Mist City now. I'm going to find him." Lian Fei took a deep breath and said, gritting his teeth, "Brother Fei, you are too impulsive." Yao Susu suddenly frowned and scolded him. "What, Susu, are you going to stop me?" Lian Fei's face suddenly became gloomy. Yao Susu said coldly, "Do you know what cultivation Lin Sun has now?" Lian Fei was stunned. "At most, he is in the human gang realm." Yao Susu said, "Do you think he can participate in the province test with ordinary human gang realm overmatches?" Lian Fei was shocked, and his feverish mind calmed down a lot. Indeed, he only cared about revenge and neglected many details. In Donglin Town, Lin Sun could survive under our constant suppression. People like him are not so easy to deal with at all. Yao Susu's eyes were calm, and she said quickly, "Now that he has the qualification to participate in the province test, he will be more difficult to deal with than before. Under such circumstances, how much chance do you think you will win if you rashly go to find him for revenge?" Lian Fei felt as if he had been given a rude awakening. He said, Su Su, you're right. I was reckless just now. Yao Su Su smiled, and her expression softened. Brother Fei, your identity is different now. As the saying goes, a man of noble status should never sit in a corner. How can you risk your life just for revenge? Lien Fei sat back on the chair and said, Su Su, what do you think I should do? Very simple, send someone to assassinate this brat. A cold light flashed in Yao Su Su's eyes. As for us, we just need to wait for the news of Lin's death. Lien Fei frowned, but I want to kill him with my own hands. Yao Su Su sighed. Brother Fei, remember your identity. You're my husband, the son-in-law of my father, Yao Tuahai. You're the core figure of the entire Yao clan. You should learn to think like a big shot now. Lien Fei was stunned. A big shot? Yao Su Su nodded and said seriously, That's right. A big shot can make countless people work for him, as long as he makes good use of his power and influence. He can decide the life and death of others with just one order. This is the so-called turning one's hand over the clouds and turning one's hand over the rain. He can control life and death with a single thought. Lien Fei's heart was inexplicably filled with hot blood. He said, Su Su, do you think I can become such a big shot? Yao Su Su smiled softly and said, In my heart, Brother Fei, you can do it. Good. I'll listen to you. Lien Fei made a decision. At this time, the door was suddenly pushed open, and the thin and slender figure of Yao Tuahai came in. Yao Su Su and Lien Fei were both surprised and quickly got up to greet him. Su Su is right, Yao Tuahai said casually, and then looked at Lien Fei and said, I've just learned that Lin Sun defeated Yuan Shu and Qi Yunxiao outside Mist College. If you don't know who they are, you can ask Su Su to tell you. With that, Yao Tuahai turned around and left. You two can deal with the rest. I will only help you pay attention to this matter secretly. I won't intervene. Until Yao Tuahai left, Lien Fei couldn't help asking, Su Su, who are Yuan Shu and Qi Yunxiao? Yao Su Su looked a little surprised and doubtful at the moment. After a while, she said in a low voice, Brother Fei, Lin Sun is stronger than we expected. As she said, she told Lien Fei the identities of Yuan Shu and Qi Yunxiao in detail. After knowing all this, Lien Fei's expression suddenly changed. He gritted his teeth and said, How is this possible? How can his combat effectiveness improve faster than mine in a year? Yao Su Su sighed and said, Brother Fei, now you should understand that we can only use our power and influence to deal with him. Lien Fei was still unwilling, but he also knew that this was the only way at present. He couldn't help gritting his teeth and said, Su Su, what should we do? A touch of determination appeared in Yao Su Su's eyes. She seemed to have made a decision and said, In the underground forces of Mist City, there is an organization specializing in assassination called Tingyu Tower, Tingyu Tower. In a bright and clean room, a man was sitting cross-legged on one side of the tea table, tasting tea, with wisps of smoke coming out of the incense burner made of auspicious beast. Outside the open window, the green mountains, the bamboo forest, and the chirping of cicadas and birds were very quiet. The man, dressed in a green Confucian robe, was reading an ancient book in his hand. The man exuded a scholarly aura. He was cultured and refined, and as he sat there quietly, he had a calm and indifferent temperament. However, his face was covered by a dark golden mask, and only a pair of black eyes that were calm like ice and snow were revealed on the mask, causing his entire bearing to have a mysterious aura. The man's name was Tingyu. It was a poetic name, but in the hearts of many big shots in Mist City, this name had the same chilling power as the code name of the devil, because this name represented the most mysterious behind-the-scenes master of Tingyu Tower. Suddenly, a clear and ethereal sound of wind chimes sounded. Say it. Tingyu's voice was low and sweet. It was just a word, but it seemed to have a strange magic that attracted people involuntarily. There is a special task for you to choose, Your Excellency. Outside the door, a respectful voice sounded. Oh, tell me. Ting Yu slowly closed the book in his hand, picked up the tea on the table, and gently sipped it. 30 minutes ago, someone posted a task to assassinate a teenager of Human Gang Realm with a high reward of 3,000 gold coins. The employer asked Residual Snow, Ghost Moon, and Grey Martin to do it. Ting Yu said, Residual Snow is a first-class assassin in Heaven Gang Realm. Since he came to our Ting Yu Tower, he has carried out 73 tasks without failure. Ghost Moon and Grey Mink are the assassins in the Earth Gang Realm who are best at cooperation. If they work together with Residual Snow, they can carry out a perfect assassination. It seems that the employer knows something about our Ting Yu Tower. Speaking of this, Ting Yu put down the teacup in his hand and looked at the swaying green bamboo outside the window, saying, The price of 3,000 gold coins is indeed a high price, but it's a little strange that this kind of power is only used to deal with a teenager of Human Gang Realm. Your Excellency, we have found out that the teenager is Lin Sun, 14 years old, from Donglin Town, Green Maple County. He just signed up for the province test in Mist College this morning. The respectful voice outside the door said quickly, It is said that Lin Sun is extremely powerful. Today, he defeated Yuan Shu, the young master of Yuan family, and Qi Yunxiao, the young master of Azure Light Pavilion, outside Mist College. Ting Yu chuckled and said, No wonder he asked Residual Snow to do it at such a high price. It turns out that he wants to kill a young talent who is qualified to participate in the province test. Your Excellency, you don't know. According to the information we have collected, Lin Sun has completely angered the young masters and young ladies of many big forces in Mist City because he defeated Yuan Shu and Qi Yunxiao in public. It is expected that from today on, many forces will send forces to deal with Lin Sun. The respectful voice outside the door said, Under such circumstances, we don't know whether we should take over the task of assassinating Lin Sun. Ting Yu said, Oh, this boy named Lin Sun is interesting. He is only 14 years old, but so many people want to kill him. While speaking, he gently tapped the tea table with his fingers, as if thinking about something. After a while, he said, Interesting people are sometimes the most dangerous. Since Lin Sun dares to do this, he must have something to rely on. Go and tell the employer that the task can be accepted, but he needs to wait for a while before taking action. Wait! Yes, wait for the big forces in the city to send forces to deal with this boy, and then take action after seeing the result. If he is dead, we don't have to do it. If he is not dead, speaking of this, Ting Yu was silent for a moment, and then said, If he is not dead, tell the employer that if he wants us to take action, the reward of 3,000 gold coins is far from enough. At least, he needs 10,000 gold coins. Your Excellency! The voice outside the door disappeared. Ting Yu sighed and looked at the green mountains in the distance. After a long time, he said leisurely, It's really true that it's hard to have a practitioner from a poor family. In today's empire, the most intolerable thing for those powerful forces is the provocation from the poor practitioners at the bottom, right? His voice was low and deep, echoing in the quiet room. Outside the window, it began to rain. The drizzle was like smoke and fog, wetting the green bamboo. The registration for the province test on the first day ended in the evening, and a total of more than 800 practitioners signed up that day. Of course, this was only the first day, and more practitioners would participate in the future. It was also on this day that the news that Yuan Shu, the young master of Yuan family, and Qi Yunxiao, the young master of Azure Light Pavilion, were defeated by a boy named Lin Sun spread like wildfire and caused an uproar throughout Mist City. Many practitioners were even more shocked when they learned that Lin Sun was probably a practitioner from a poor family. His identity was too sensitive. When did a poor boy dare to challenge a rich boy? And he even won. This behavior might make those practitioners from poor families feel happy, but for those powerful forces, Lin Sun's action was undoubtedly tantamount to violating their bottom line. Many people realized that Lin Sun was going to be in trouble. Chapter 209. When Clan. In a small courtyard in the backyard, when Mingxiu sat alone in front of the window, frowning. It was drizzling outside. The dense rain was like the sadness in her heart at the moment, which couldn't be wiped away or cut off. When Mingxiu was extremely surprised to meet Lin Sun today. Thinking of Lin Sun's warning, she felt extremely complicated. She was angry and confused. Should she really let bygones be bygones? When Mingxiu didn't know, but she knew that today's incident was caused by her. If she didn't take some action, it would mean that she admitted defeat in the eyes of outsiders, which would undoubtedly damage her reputation and her influence among the younger generation in Mist City. What should I do? When Mingxiu was stunned. Miss, there's news. A maidservant rushed into the room, her face full of excitement. This time, Yuan family, Azure Light Pavilion, Qian family, Zhou family, Jing family. After reporting the names of 7 or 8 clans in succession, the maidservant said, "They have decided to send forces to attack Lin Sun." When Mingxiu was shocked, "How can so many forces take action?" The maidservant smiled proudly. "Miss, Lin Sun is just a bumpkin from a poor family. Now he dares to behave atrociously in Mist City. Which powerful force can tolerate him? Such an extremely vile and lowly person should be annihilated in one go. Otherwise, if the other disciples from poor backgrounds were to learn from him and act in an unbridled manner, then the world would surely fall into chaos." When Mingxiu frowned and said coldly, "Who told you that Lin Sun was born in a poor family?" The maidservant trembled and stammered, I also heard it from others." When Mingxiu was so angry that she laughed, "A bunch of idiots. If Lin Sun was a bumpkin, how could he enter the bloodthirsty camp for training? How could the grandson of Blood King Ning Bugui become friends with him? How could the third son of Fortune God sure value Lin Sun so much? Most importantly, even in the bloodthirsty camp, Lin Sun enjoyed special treatment. Even stupid people knew that Lin Sun was not a poor person at all. But now, many forces regarded Lin Sun as a poor person at the bottom and even humiliated him as a bumpkin. What was the difference between them and idiots? The maidservant was so scared that her face turned pale. She stammered, "Miss, don't you want to deal with Lin Sun?" When Mingxiu was stunned and suddenly lost interest. Her anger vanished. She waved her hand and said, "You can leave now." The maid hurriedly left the room. Perhaps doing nothing is the best choice. When Mingxiu kept silent for a long time and finally made a decision. As the capital city of the southwestern province of the empire, Mist City was extremely prosperous and vast. There were dozens of forces and clans in it. For ordinary people, this day might be no different from the past, but for many forces and cultivators in the city, this day seemed to be quite different. When dusk fell, almost all the major forces in the city knew that the boy named Lin Sun was going to be in trouble. Some well-informed practitioners also noticed what had happened and couldn't help but sigh. Was a young expert who could defeat Yuan Shu and Qi Yunxiao going to die like this? City Lord Residence. Governor Lu Wujuan looked at the information sent in his hand and couldn't help frowning slightly. These guys are too anxious. Next to him, a middle-aged scholar with 3 strands of long beard under his chin said with a smile, "Your Excellency, they intend to make an example of Lin Sun to warn all the poor practitioners in the city so as to avoid such things happening again in the future." Lu Wujuan snorted, "But have they ever thought that Lin Sun has signed up for the province test? Such a talent, even if he comes from a poor family, will inevitably be valued by the empire in the future. They have gone too far by doing this." The middle-aged scholar agreed and said, "Indeed, the province test is to select the real talents for the empire. According to the strength of Lin Sun, who can defeat Yuan Shu and Qi Yunxiao, he must be a talented young man and has a great chance to pass the province test. If he can pass the province test, he will have the opportunity to participate in the nation test. Under such circumstances, if he is killed, the impact will obviously be very bad. After a pause, the middle-aged scholar changed the subject and said, "However, there are so many geniuses in the world. The death of a young man from a poor family is nothing to the whole empire. In my opinion, you don't have to worry about it. You just need to issue an order to let these powerful forces suppress the impact caused by the killing of Lin Sun." Lu Wujuan thought for a moment and nodded. "I'll leave it to you." The middle-aged scholar cupped his hands and said, "Yes, Your Excellency." In the southwest of Mist City. In people's eyes, the southwest region was the place where the low-level civilians gathered. There were all kinds of people from all walks of life. For some people with status, they disdained to set foot in this area. At this time, in a courtyard in this area, Chao Yunxiu suddenly laughed and said with a little rejoice, "Fortunately, Lin Sun refused to join Qingyun society. Otherwise, I'm afraid we will be implicated by him this time." Beside Chao Yunxiu stood more than a dozen young men and women, all of whom were members of Qingyun society. Hearing this, they couldn't help laughing. Chao Yunxiu stopped smiling and suddenly sighed. "However, through Lin Sun's experience this time, I realize that it's really difficult for us practitioners from poor families to rise." Others were stunned and kept silent. Indeed, Lin Sun provoked the anger of many powerful forces in Mist City just because he defeated Yuan Shu and Qi Yunxiao. They wanted to eradicate him in one fell swoop, which was too terrible. Humph, those powerful forces all boast themselves as superior people and regard us poor people as humble servants. They take what they want and take at will. What they did to Lin Sun now is completely to frighten us by making an example of him to others and frighten us. Someone sneered. "That's right. The reason why I want to establish Qingyun society is to let us get rid of this shackle and no longer be oppressed by the powerful forces." Chao Yunxiu took a deep breath and said firmly, "Anyway, although Lin Sun refused to join our Qingyun society, he is still a member of poor families. The unfair treatment he suffered today is too disappointing. I've decided to do something for him." Others were stunned. Just now, Chao Yunxiu was glad that he didn't get involved with Lin Sun. Why did he suddenly change his mind at this time? Chao Yunxiu said, "I'm doing this for the sake of our future. With Lin Sun's case, we can test the bottom line of the powerful forces. Only in this way can we avoid the same experience as Lin Sun in our future actions." Everyone suddenly became spirited and said, "Brother Chao, what are you going to do?" Chao Yunxiu smiled and said, "Spread the news and make this matter known to the whole city. Tell the whole world that Lin Sun, a poor child who can participate in the province test, is suppressed by the powerful forces and may even die because of this." Someone wondered, "That's it?" Chao Yunxiu laughed and said, "The news seems to be simple, but it will be hard to end when it is widely spread. Maybe it will attract the attention of the real bigwigs in the forbidden city of the Empire. At that time, we can judge the real attitude of the Empire to us poor children." Everyone quickly came to a realization, and all of them looked at Chao Yunxiu with admiration. This method was truly too wonderful for words. It's better if Lin Sun is killed. In this way, the noise will be more attractive, someone couldn't help saying excitedly. Is it appropriate? Some people couldn't bear to curse Lin Sun in this way because he was also a poor child. Chao Yunxiu waved his hand and said, "We don't need to pay attention to this. We just need to use this matter to achieve our purpose." That being said, he actually knew that if Lin Sun died, it would be more conducive to the spread of this news and make the matter more serious. Let's wait and see. Tonight, maybe there will be a result. At that time, all of us in Qingyun society will take action and use our power to ask for an explanation for Lin Sun. Chao Yunxiu took a deep breath and said in a low voice. When they heard, asking for an explanation for Lin Sun, many people laughed. They all knew that this was just a gimmick. Who would really care about Lin Sun's life or death? It was dusk. Lin Sun sat in his own yard, with all kinds of delicious dishes and a jar of soul-burning liquor on the stone table in front of him. Opposite the stone table, Shu Jin was drinking and eating heartily. It was drizzling from the sky, but the two of them were enjoying it. The province test will start in September. Do you have any other plans in the next 6 months? Shu Jin asked vaguely while gnawing a piece of beast meat. Lin Sun answered concisely, practice and make money. Shu Jin spat out the bone in his mouth and squinted at Lin Sun. Hey, good idea. But I feel that you will have a lot of trouble in the near future. Lin Sun shrugged and said, what's the point of being afraid of trouble? Besides, even if I am in big trouble, I still have you, Jin. Shu Jin was stunned. He pointed at Lin Sun and said, damn it, you have also become bad. Lin Sun said with a smile, I have no choice. There are too many bad people in the world. I have to make myself bad. Good people don't live long. Shu Jin said angrily, don't talk nonsense. I just want to ask you, are you really ready to face the coming storm? Lin Sun was surprised and said, I just beat 2 playboys. Is it really so serious? Before Shu Jin said anything, the door of the courtyard was knocked open and Chu Feng rushed in. The neatly dressed and elegant director of the commune of spiritual tattooists looked anxious at the moment. He shouted, my dear brother, you're still in the mood to drink and have fun when you're facing a great disaster? Chapter 210. Was it a disaster? Lin Sun was stunned. He put down his chopsticks and asked in surprise, Brother Chu Feng, what do you mean? He was not surprised that Chu Feng could find his residence. Otherwise, Chu Feng would be the director of the commune of spiritual tattooists in vain. Chu Feng was in a hurry, but when he saw Shu Jin drinking beside Lin Sun, his pupils shrank at once. Thinking of the deeds of the great man mentioned by old Diao, he felt an inexplicable awe in his heart. Chu Feng took a deep breath and said to Lin Sun with a wry smile, Brother, didn't you go out today? Lin Sun was stunned and said, I just came back from Mist College this morning. Seeing Lin Sun's expression, Chu Feng completely realized that Lin Sun really didn't know his current situation. Chu Feng stopped talking nonsense and directly told Lin all kinds of news that had already caused a storm in Mist City today. In the process, Lin Sun's expression also became serious, with wisps of cold light surging in his black eyes. At present, it is certain that 13 forces, including Yuan family, Azure Light Pavilion, Jing family and Zhou family, will all take action against you. Chu Feng looked solemn. Do you understand now? Lin Sun nodded, but he was extremely puzzled. After I beat Yuan Shu and Qi Yunxiao, I had expected that there would be some trouble. But they actually mobilized such a large force. They really think highly of me. Chu Feng pointed out, you don't understand. The descendants of these powerful forces can be beaten or even killed, but the murderer must not be from a poor family. This is the bottom line of those powerful forces. Once this kind of thing happens, it means that someone challenges their status and dignity, which is absolutely not allowed to happen. After pausing for a moment, Chu Feng said worriedly, Moreover, I suspect that the reason why they're making such a big fuss and mobilizing such a large force is only because they're using killing you as an excuse to make an example out of you. Lin Sun was surprised. The contradiction between the powerful forces and the poor at the bottom has become so serious? At this time, Shu Jin suddenly said, It's more serious than you think. At this moment, there was a trace of reminiscence on Shu Jin's rough and slightly drunk face. He told a story with a slightly complicated expression. In the winter of 137 years ago, a murder took place in a restaurant in the Forbidden City, the capital of the empire. At that time, a hedonistic son of a rich family whose financial situation had long since declined was dead drunk in a restaurant. He suddenly became lustful and used force to kidnap the restaurant owner's daughter. That night, the beautiful 13-year-old girl was tortured to death. After this happened, the tavern owner wanted to seek justice, but in the end, his family of more than 10 people, including him and his wife, were all killed. Not even their bones were left. Because the owner of the tavern and the others were all from poor families, after this incident, It did not cause much of a stir under the operation of the playboy, but it was accidentally heard by a practitioner at this time. That practitioner killed the playboy with a sword on the same day, causing many people to praise him, saying that he killed the playboy with a sword and had the style of ancient chivalry. Who would have thought that this matter would cause a bloody storm? On the next day, the practitioner named Ren Changyuan was personally captured and killed by Wen Zhongqing, the most famous blood-slaughtering general in the Forbidden City at that time. On the same day, dozens of aristocratic families and Wen Zhongqing in the Forbidden City carried out a 10-day search and arrest of the poor practitioners in the Forbidden City in the name of eliminating the internal troubles of the imperial capital. In these 10 days, it was a bloody storm. Every day, tens of thousands of poor practitioners were mercilessly killed, which caused an uproar in the whole imperial capital. Everyone was in danger. Later on, it was only when the current emperor personally stepped forward that this grand and bloody slaughter was averted. These 10 days were also called Bloody 10 Days. After this incident, Wen Zhongqing, the blood-slaughtering general, was unscathed, but he was deprived of his rank of general and sent to the northwest border. As for the dozen or so powerful forces that participated in the massacre, they only paid a small price. As for those poor practitioners who died, it became a bloody warning from the aristocratic families to the poor at the bottom, which had a far-reaching impact. At the very least, up until now, very few people had mentioned the Bloody 10 Days. However, anyone who knew about it knew that those rich and powerful forces would do anything to protect their own status and power against the poor and poor forces. After telling the story, Xu Jin looked at Lin Sun and said, Ren Changyuan, who came from a poor family, caused the tragedy of 10 bloody days just because he killed a playboy from a declining family. What's your opinion on this? Lin Sun couldn't calm down. He never thought that the contradiction between the aristocratic families and the poor at the bottom had become so serious. After a while, he said, So, my situation today is somewhat similar to that of Ren Changyuan? Xu Jin smiled and didn't express his opinion. Chu Feng nodded and said, It's very similar, but you are different from Ren Changyuan. At least in terms of identity, you are now a spiritual tattooist of the commune of spiritual tattooists. Speaking of this, Chu Feng said bitterly, But for now, only a few of us know this identity, so it's useless. Lin Sun was speechless. I don't care about this. I just wonder why the contradiction between the aristocratic families and the poor at the bottom is so serious. Chu Feng sneered. Brother, to put it simply, you will understand that all this is to maintain their status and interests. In this empire, status and interests are fixed, and there are so many of them. If the poor want to rise, they are bound to seize certain status and interests. In this case, which aristocratic family can tolerate this kind of thing? Lin Sun frowned. Status and interests? Chu Feng said firmly. Yes, with status, you will have greater interests, and the so-called interests can be called cultivation resources. Haven't you found that all kinds of cultivation resources in the empire, especially the top cultivation treasures, are almost monopolized by the aristocratic families? A son of an aristocratic family can enjoy all kinds of cultivation resources from birth, while a son of a poor family can hardly cultivate. If he wants to have cultivation resources, he must fight for them with his life. This is the gap between them. Lin Sun thought about it and couldn't help but be lost in thought. For the first time, he realized that there were not only his own reasons but also many unpredictable difficulties on the road of cultivation. Just like what happened today, he only beat 2 sons of aristocratic families, but it caused so much trouble. It seemed absurd, but the cruel truth behind all this was enough to make Lin Sun vigilant. What are you going to do after understanding all this? Xu Jin asked suddenly. Lin Sun was silent for a moment, and his lips suddenly curved as if he was smiling, but there was no emotion in the smile. He calmly said, Ren Changyuan died back then, but it doesn't mean that I will follow in his footsteps. In my eyes, there has never been a difference between the rich and the poor, not now and not in the future. The only difference is the difference between friends and enemies." Chu Feng was stunned and asked in surprise, What are you going to do?" Shu Jin seemed to understand. An imperceptible luster flashed in his sleepy eyes, and he said, "Boy, are you sure?" Lin Sun shrugged and said, "If I admit defeat now, will they let me go?" Immediately, he took a deep breath, and his black eyes were full of deep calmness. He said word by word, "Since they choose to be my enemy, they have to bear the price." Shu Jin laughed and drank up a large bowl of wine. He said, "Fierce qi rushes out of the heart and sees death as sleep. A real man should be like this." Looking at the calm Lin Sun and the laughing Shu Jin, Chu Feng suddenly realized that perhaps they were the real practitioners who were full of courage and not afraid of anything in the world. It didn't take long for Chu Feng to leave in a hurry. He already knew Lin Sun's decision, and he also decided to go crazy with Lin Sun. When Chu Feng learned that Lin Sun needed first-hand information, a batch of spiritual short crossbows and healing elixirs for the battle, Chu Feng immediately took this matter on his own. The commune of spiritual tattooists was not short of information and materials. Chu Feng even wanted to send a group of his own forces to help Lin Sun, but Shu Jin directly refused. Until Chu Feng left, Shu Jin said, "I want to hear what you're going to do." Lin Sun answered concisely, "Take the initiative to attack." Shu Jin continued to ask, "What do you need me to do?" Lin Sun smiled and said, "When I need you, it's enough that you can show up in time." This sentence seemed a little rogue, but Shu Jin appreciated it very much. He said, "This is the demeanor of a trainee of the bloodthirsty camp. I thought you had forgotten what you learned in the bloodthirsty camp after you entered Mist City." Lin Sun touched his nose and said, "Indeed, I find that since I entered Mist City, there is no killing in blood, so I am still a little unaccustomed to it." A bright smile suddenly appeared on his lips, but now the opportunity finally comes. When the night fell, Lin Sun left his residence alone. At the beginning of the night, the bustling streets were more lively than during the day. Pedestrians were bustling. Among them, the most lively places were the taverns, brothels, casinos, and other places where people sought pleasure and indulged in a life of luxury. The drunken cloud house. In the hearts of many men in Mist City, the drunken cloud house was a first-class place to seek pleasure and a home of tenderness that they could not give up. Every woman here was very beautiful. Some were gentle and considerate, some were hot and provocative, and some were as cold and arrogant as ice. They were like plums, orchids, bamboos, chrysanthemums, and each had its own advantages. Chapter 2:11. The layout of the Drunken Cloud Tower was elegant, without any vulgarity. Waiters and maids were all dressed in silk, with outstanding appearance and extraordinary style of conversation. Even the guests who came to drink and have fun were mostly self-proclaimed romantic, which was totally different from ordinary brothels. When Lin Sun entered it, he saw a high platform paved with flowers and white jade railings in the center of the tower. A group of musicians were sitting on the high platform, playing drums, flutes, whistles, and zither. The music was melodious and ethereal like flowing water. In front of the high platform, there were already many guests, who seemed to be waiting for something. "Child, do you have an acquaintance?" A maid with her hair in 2 buns came up and asked obediently with a smile. Lin Sun shook his head. "I'm not looking for a girl." The maid blinked her eyes and said, "If there is no girl to accompany you, drinking and listening to music will be very boring. How about I introduce you to a good girl?" In her view, the boy in front of her seemed calm, but it was obviously the first time he came here. Maybe he was shy, so he didn't dare to ask a girl to accompany him. She had seen a lot of teenagers like him who had no experience in playing, so it was not surprising. To the maid's surprise, Lin Sun just smiled and said, "I'm looking for someone." Then he pointed to a room on the 2nd floor. "It's up there." The maid glanced at the room and her face suddenly became much more respectful. It turns out to be a friend of Senior Yuan Shan. Please invite him in. Lin Sun nodded and was about to go upstairs. Suddenly there was a burst of cheers. Looking up, he saw a woman in white came out of the high platform. She was graceful, with long black hair hanging down to her waist, and a beautiful face like a lotus flower in clear water. She was also holding a pipa in her arms. As soon as she appeared on the high platform, many people in the field cheered, and many practitioners showed fanatical love. Miss Lu Xiaoyi finally shows up. She is a well-known art practitioner in Mist College. Her pipa playing is superb and interesting. This time, our boss spent a lot of money to invite her to come to our building to perform her skills. The maid looked at Lu Xiaoyi on the high platform with a little reverence. Lin Sun nodded, withdrew his gaze, and walked up the stairs to the second floor. Yuan Shan smiled and hugged the beauty in his arms. While drinking, he sighed comfortably and said, looking at the mountains from upstairs, watching the snow from the top of the city wall, gazing at the moon from the boat, and gazing at the rosy clouds from the lake. In the end, it can't compare to gazing at the beauty under the lamp. The beauty in his arms smiled shyly and said, glib tongue. Yuan Shan laughed heartily. He suddenly bit the beauty's rosy lips and said, unfortunately, I still have something important to do tonight. Otherwise, I'll definitely let you have a taste of my glib tongue. At this moment, the closed door was suddenly pushed open and a youth walked in. The young man had a handsome face. As soon as he came in, he naturally closed the door and asked with a smile, Yuan Shan? Who let you in? Yuan Shan frowned in anger. The young man smiled warmly, looking harmless. He said, looks like you're Yuan Shan. Good, I didn't find the wrong person. Yuan Shan suddenly became vigilant and pushed away the beauty in his arms. He stood up and said with an unfriendly expression, little guy, are you here to cause trouble? The youth smiled without saying anything. He just raised his hand, and a ball of black light suddenly burst out from his sleeve. Hum! A terrible and rapid whistling sound suddenly rang out. Yuan Shan's face suddenly changed. As he was about to dodge, he felt a sharp pain in his throat. A bowl-sized bloody hole was shot out. Then, he blacked out completely. Clatter! Yuan Shan's body fell to the ground. At the same time, a puff of blood burst out from his throat, splashing everywhere in the room with scarlet color. The girl from the brothel had already been frightened by the sudden scene just now. At this moment, seeing Yuan Shan's miserable death, she couldn't help but scream. However, as soon as she opened her mouth, she felt a pain in the back of her head and fainted. You don't even know me, but you still want to kill me. What an idiot! The youth murmured. This young man was naturally Lin Sun. The crossbow he had used just now was called Soul Devourer, which was a top-notch item gifted by Chu Feng. It was worth 300 gold coins, and its power was incomparably great. At close range, it could even kill a Sea of Souls realm warrior by surprise. The only drawback was that this crossbow could only be used once before it was scrapped. But your life is worth 300 gold coins. It's not a loss. Lin Sun turned to leave and closed the door. He called a waiter and ordered, remember, don't disturb him again tonight. If you spoil Brother Yuan Shan's mood, you will suffer a lot. The waiter hurriedly nodded and promised. Lin Sun walked down the stairs. When he just arrived at the gate of the Drunken Cloud Tower, a sonorous and fierce music suddenly sounded behind him. The music was like a golden spear and iron horse galloping on the battlefield. As soon as it sounded, it made people's blood boil and the impulse to fight. Lin Sun couldn't help looking back and saw that on the white jade platform, the girl named Lu Xiaoyi had begun to sing. Bristling with anger, leaning against the railing, the drizzling rain rests. Looking up at the sky, roaring with great vigor. 30 merits, dust and earth, 8,000 miles of road, clouds and moon. Don't be idle, the youth is sad for nothing. The shame of the human race hasn't been wiped off. When will the hatred of the Empire be extinguished? Driving the long chariot, trampling the turbulent mountain. Ambitious to eat barbarian meat when hungry, laughing to drink the enemy's blood when thirsty. Cleaning up the old mountains and rivers from the beginning, facing the heaven. This was a brothel, a place where people indulged in a life of luxury and indulged in pleasures. But at this moment, an intense and passionate battle song rang out, instantly silencing everyone present. Many guests were shocked. It seemed that they didn't expect that such a delicate girl as Lu Xiaoyi could sing such a passionate song. There were also many Xiuzhe whose blood boiled and were infected by the song. They wanted to join the army and kill their way to the front lines of the battlefield. Lin Sun was also shocked and touched. He couldn't help asking the waiter next to him, "Who wrote this song?" "Who else?" "Of course it's Blood King Ning Bugue." The waiter answered proudly. Lin Sun nodded and turned to leave the drunken cloud tower. Boom! Suddenly, there was a sound of thunder in the night sky. Lightning tore the night curtain like silver snakes and danced wildly in the sky. Whoosh! In an instant, the wind suddenly rose and a heavy rain poured down. The bustling scene on the street suddenly became a mess, with people taking shelter from the rain everywhere. Lin Sun paced in the heavy rain. His clothes were soon soaked, but he seemed to be unaware of it and walked along the street. He was recalling the information sent by Chu Feng. Yuan Shan, who was killed just now, was a strong practitioner of Gang Spirit Realm from Yuan family. He was not powerful, but he played an important role in giving orders. According to the intelligence, Yuan Shan would gather a group of practitioners from Yuan family to launch a surprise attack on Lin Sun tonight at 11 o'clock in the morning. But Yuan Shan probably didn't expect that he would be killed by Lin Sun before he started to take action. Don't waste your time. You're too young and sad. Tonight is a good time to kill someone. You can't miss it. Lin Sun took a deep breath, with indifference in his black eyes. Before long, he turned into an alley. In the depths of the alley, there was a flickering dim light in the rain curtain, which couldn't dispel the darkness at all. Lin Sun stopped in front of the light. It was a house with the door unlatched. Even in the pouring rain at night, there was still a burst of lively laughter in the house. Lin Sun smiled silently. A pitch-black saber appeared in his hand, which was 2 feet and 3 inches long and 3 fingers wide. The blade looked simple, but it was extremely sharp. This saber, named Black Spirit, was a high-quality spiritual weapon of middle grade of human rank. It was also a gift from Chu Feng. Squeak! The door was pushed open and Lin Sun walked in. There was a small courtyard behind the door. In the depths of the courtyard, there was a rather magnificent old building. At this moment, the building was brightly lit, and the lively laughter came from it. Lin Sun walked up the steps and came to the front of the building. He was hesitating whether to break in directly or hide in the dark for a chance to take action. At this moment, a figure suddenly came out. It was a middle-aged man as thin as firewood. When he saw Lin Sun, he was obviously stunned and asked subconsciously, "Who are you?" Lin Sun raised his head, and a smile appeared on his handsome face washed by the rain. "I'm here to take your life." Whoosh! Before the voice died away, Lin Sun's figure had rushed out like a flash of black lightning, and chopped at the thin middle-aged man. Unexpectedly, the thin middle-aged man's reaction was extremely fast. At the moment when Lin Sun attacked, a black light burst out from his body, and a bronze shield appeared in front of him. However, the thin middle-aged man obviously underestimated the horror of Lin Sun's saber. With a loud bang, the bronze shield in front of him burst into pieces like a piece of paper, and he was shaken away by the saber. No one knew how many bones in his body were broken, and he let out a shrill scream. This scream was like a signal. Suddenly, there was a burst of angry shouts in the originally lively house. "Shit, it's the voice of Third Brother! The enemy is coming! Damn it, in this Mist City, someone dares to attack us? I'd like to see who the fuck dares to find trouble at this time." With the voice, a sturdy figure rushed out first, but what greeted him was a ghost-like saber that appeared out of thin air. Whoosh! This saber was incredibly fast, and the edge of the saber was covered with an illusory cyan luster, which looked a little strange in the night rain. With a puff, the sturdy figure had no time to dodge and was split in the waist. 2 parts of his body fell to the ground of the courtyard, with blood flowing. Ninth brother! In the roar, 4 or 5 figures rushed out and saw Lin Sun standing beside the stone pillar in front of the door. P.S. The words in the text are Red River written by Yu Fei. Chapter 2:12. The heavy rain was pouring and the thunder was raging. Dazzling lightning flashed in the night sky, making the world fall into a restless and violent atmosphere. In the courtyard, the lights were still brightly lit, but in addition to the damp smell of rain, there was also a thick smell of blood mixed with cold killing intent in the air. Boom! A roar of thunder shook the world. From the moment the 4 or 5 figures rushed out, the battle had inevitably begun. Lin Sun looked serious and cut out a simple and neat saber. The simple and unadorned blade was shining with frightening cold light under the dazzling lightning. With a loud bang, a burly practitioner with thick bones, holding 2 axes, collided with Lin Sun head-on. At the moment when the blade and the axes intersected, a terrible force burst out of Lin Sun's thin body, directly shaking the burly practitioner out. He crashed through 2 layers of walls and fell to the ground, unable to get up again. Almost at the same time, a fist suddenly hit Lin Sun's head from the side. The fist, wrapped in terrible black gang chi, was like a cannonball bursting out. Lin Sun didn't dodge. He swung his left hand and punched the opponent fiercely. Crack! The terrible and frightening sound of bones breaking suddenly sounded. The fist seemed to explode, with flesh and bones bursting and even the arm being crushed. Screams sounded, and the attacker couldn't bear the power of Lin's punch. He fell hard in the distant courtyard and fainted in an instant. In a split second, 2 more people had been completely disabled. The whole process was as easy as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. From the beginning to the end, Lin Sun looked calm and his mood never fluctuated. In the heavy rain, his thin and handsome figure was like a straight spear, and the black spirit saber was still dripping blood. He was like a killing god from hell, cold and ruthless. It was horrible. The expressions of the remaining 2 practitioners changed dramatically. They were all ruthless people. Although they were only in the human gang realm, they had rich fighting experience and cruel means, which couldn't be compared by some ordinary practitioners. But now, when they saw this young man's skilled, simple, violent, and bloody method of killing, it caused them to be terrified and uneasy in their hearts. This kind of killing method was simply like a butcher who had galloped on the battlefield countless times. It was not fancy at all, but it killed with a single strike. It was not something an ordinary youth could master. They had seen many ruthless characters over the years, but this was the first time they had seen such an abnormal fighting style. It was very similar to the fighting style of the army, but it seemed to be even more terrifying. Who was this young man? The hearts of the remaining 2 cultivators were already filled with terror. They dodged repeatedly and even wanted to escape, but they didn't dare. Because from the beginning until the end, the young man's vital energy had been locked onto them, and if they dared to flee, then they would definitely suffer the most ferocious attack. Friend, who exactly are you? We have no enmity with you, so why do you want to kill us? A Xiuzha shouted harshly. Whoosh! What answered him was a cold blade. In the heavy rain, Lin Sun's figure suddenly appeared like lightning. The cultivator's entire body went cold, and he dodged instinctively, yet he never imagined that this saber strike was simply like a heaven-encompassing net, and it possessed an imposing aura that covered the heavens and the earth and enveloped the surroundings, causing him to be unable to dodge or escape. The Xiuzha roared and waved the long sword in his hand with all his strength, trying to fight against Lin Sun. But this time, he miscalculated again. The edge of the blade suddenly slid down along his sword, and with a pu sound, it had already severed his hand that held the sword. Almost at the same time, Lin Sun rushed over, grabbed the long sword in his hand with his left hand, and stabbed it into the Xiozha's heart fiercely. Puff! The Xiozha felt as if he was struck by lightning. His eyes bulged and he couldn't believe it. His lips trembled and he wanted to say something, but in the end, his head tilted and his body fell to the ground. Whoosh! The other Xiozha had already seen that the situation was not good, so he took the opportunity to rush out of the courtyard. Lin Sun didn't move, but a short crossbow appeared in his hand. He pulled the trigger without hesitation. With a loud bang, a dazzling colorful light like a gorgeous sunset bloomed in the dark rainstorm night. In the blink of an eye, this beautiful scene disappeared, and in front of the courtyard was a corpse. The corpse was horrible, with blood flowing all over like a hornet's nest. Lin Sun put away the short crossbow named Burning Sunset, and rushed out of the courtyard without hesitation. All the 6 enemies had been killed. The movement just now seemed to be drowned by the thunder and rain, but it couldn't be hidden from the Xiozha's eyes and ears. He must leave immediately. However, just at the moment when Lin Sun stepped out of the courtyard, he suddenly felt a palpitation in his heart and dodged to one side. Whoosh! As soon as he left, an arrow inserted into the place where he had been, silently breaking a bottomless hole in the ground. Lin Sun was shocked. A master finally came. This arrow came silently. Lin Sun noticed it when it was close to him, and its power was so great that it was obviously a powerful figure who was proficient in assassination. Lin Sun turned back in an instant and looked in the direction of the arrow under the cover of the door. On the eaves in the distance, heavy rain was pouring down and the night was shrouded. He could only vaguely see an extremely vague figure. The figure was like a touch of gray. If Lin Sun's soul perception was not far superior to that of a Superman, it would be difficult for him to detect it. The figure failed to hit Lin Sun, and then fled to the distance. Almost at the same time, Lin Sun heard a voice as cold as a viper's tongue. "Boy, your life is mine tonight." After that, the blurry figure vanished completely. Obviously, this mysterious assassin possessed some sort of secret technique that allowed him to conceal himself. Lin Sun sneered, but he didn't leave in a hurry. Instead, he squatted down and carefully looked at the hole pierced by the arrow. After a while, Lin Sun had a general judgment in his mind. This was not a short crossbow, but a real bow and arrow with mysterious power. Its biggest feature was that it was silent and impossible to guard against it. Combined with the power of this arrow, the opponent's cultivation was at least in human gang realm, or even higher. "Want to play with me? Let's see if you can survive tonight." Lin Sun's lips curled into a cold arc. In the 1 year's training in the Bloodthirsty camp, there was a lot of training about assassination and hiding. Few people knew that the beautiful and sexy young man was actually a master of assassination. Lin Sun had been with young man for a year. His mastery of assassination was far superior to that of other trainees. For example, in the assessment of the Demon Cloud Ridge Theater of Operations, Lin Sun spent several days to set up a trap and killed a top assassin from the Water Barbarian branch in one fell swoop in a thatched cottage. The assassin was named Shrieing, a second-level barbarian soldier comparable to an Earth Gang realm practitioner. His means of hiding were more mysterious and terrible than that of the assassin Lin Sun had just met. But in the end, Shrieing was killed by Lin Sun, who was only at the 9th level of martial realm at that time. It didn't take long for Lin Sun to leave the courtyard quietly. The rainstorm was getting heavier and heavier, completely submerging the mist city in the pouring water drops. Thunder was surging in the sky, and silver snakes were dancing wildly. There were almost no pedestrians on the street. Only the fleeing stray dogs and cats were barking in the rain. Lin Sun walked in the shadow, soaked by the rain, but he seemed to be undisturbed and walked on his own. The second batch of targets had been solved, and the third batch of targets was about to be dealt with, a group of hanger-ons from Azure Light Pavilion. The so-called hanger-ons, like guests, were the practitioners who joined Azure Light Pavilion. According to the information sent by Chufeng, Azure Light Pavilion dispatched 9 hanger-ons this time, and the most alarming ones were 2 Earthgang realm strongmen. One was Chang Henshui, who joined Azure Light Pavilion more than 10 years ago. With his Earthgang realm cultivation, he had an extremely high status among the hanger-ons of Azure Light Pavilion. The other one was Lu Zhong, a military practitioner who had just retired from the frontline battlefield. It was said that his fighting capacity was extremely fierce. The practitioners of Azure Light Pavilion would attack in the early hours of this morning. This time, Lin Sun still intended to find them in advance, but when he found the place, he found nothing. After thinking for a moment, he turned back and walked to his home. It was common that there were accidents in the information. Since Chang Henshui and Lu Zhong were not there, they must have taken action in advance. If they wanted to deal with him, there was only one place to choose, that was, his home. However, when walking on a street not far from his home, Lin Sun suddenly stopped. He raised his black eyes and looked into the distance through the heavy rain. Boom! At this time, there was a sudden ear-piercing thunder in the sky, shaking the world. The gorgeous silver lightning cracked and cut through the eternal night, illuminating the world for a moment. Buzz! But in Lin Sun's ears, he seemed to have abandoned the sound of thunder and lightning. He only heard a sharp whistling sound in the air. In just a moment, the whistling suddenly became sharp, and there was more than one. It was obvious that the whistling came from all directions. Lin Sun was shocked, and his body suddenly bent like a fully drawn bow. The next moment, he retreated fiercely. Boom! Almost at the same time, the place where Lin Sun was within a radius of dozens of feet was covered by a dazzling light. It was a dense array of arrows, shining with sharp cold light and containing amazing penetrating power. They intertwined with each other, producing unimaginable terrible power. Amidst a terrifying explosion, a huge crater was blasted out in the middle of the street, and the nearby houses collapsed from the impact. Lin Sun gasped. If he had reacted a little slower, he would have been blasted into pieces in an instant. This was obviously a sneak attack that had been prepared for a long time. Who was it that leaked his whereabouts? The vague figure of the assassin that Lin Sun had seen before suddenly appeared in his mind, and he was almost sure that it must be done by the assassin. Kill! Friends from the major forces, please attack together and kill this kid. A burst of noise sounded from all directions, and it was especially heart-wrenching in the pouring rain of the night. In Lin Sun's spiritual perception, there were figures constantly overtaking him in different streets within a radius of 3 kilometers. It was difficult to judge the number of people for a while, but Lin Sun could still judge that this ambush was obviously prepared by all the forces who wanted to harm him. In other words, it was very likely that they had joined forces and launched an all-out attack on him at this moment. These bastards, they actually sent so many people. They really think highly of me, Lin Sun murmured in his heart. His black eyes were full of coldness, and his heart was boiling with killing intent. The next moment, he had turned around and rushed into a nearby street at an incredible speed, like a shadow. There were too many enemies. Once he was surrounded, he would definitely die. In Lin Sun's view, the intricate streets and alleys of Mist City had become the most suitable natural battlefield for assassination and surprise attacks under the cover of the heavy rain at night. Chapter 213. The heavy rain and thunder could not cover the quarrel in Tide Viewing Pavilion. Tide Viewing Pavilion stood in the east of Mist City, with mountains and rivers on one side. It was 1,000 feet high. Overlooking from the pavilion, you could see a small half of Mist City. In the pouring rain at night, Tide Viewing Pavilion was brightly lit. On the high platform of the pavilion, there was a long table. On both sides of the table, there were more than a dozen practitioners in luxurious clothes, men and women. Each of them had a kind of pampered atmosphere, which was incomparable to ordinary practitioners. Qi Tianxing sat lazily on the easternmost side of the long table, absent-mindedly looking out of the window at the dark night rain, and did not participate in the quarrel. Qi Tianxing came from Azure Light Pavilion, the top force in Mist City. He was the nephew of the head of Azure Light Pavilion and the cousin of Qi Yunxiao, the young head of Azure Light Pavilion. Tonight's action against Lin Sun was led by Azure Light Pavilion, which united more than a dozen forces in Mist City. Qi Tianxing naturally became the person in charge of this action. However, many forces had different views on tonight's action, which made them quarrel constantly at this moment. Qi Tianxing didn't care about these. Since the action had already begun, what was the point of quarreling at this time? Most importantly, he knew that even though the people seated here were all representatives of the various major powers, they were merely representatives and not truly great figures. In this case, Qi Tianxing naturally didn't want to say anything more. But what made Qi Tianxing frown was that this quarrel not only showed no sign of stopping, but also became more and more fierce. What a joke! It's just to deal with a teenager in human gang realm. If it is known by the outside world, we will be laughed to death. Someone sneered. What do you mean by that? It's killing the chicken to warn the monkey. The purpose of killing Lin Sun is to let those bastards from poor families see what terrible blows those who dare to offend us will suffer. Someone retorted. Haha, everyone, today is different from the past. Lin Sun has signed up for the province test. Even if we want to kill him, we shouldn't do it in such a big way. If the whole world knows about it, the consequences will be hard to say. That's right. Don't forget that after the bloody 10 days incident more than 100 years ago, in order to avoid such tragedies, the Empire promulgated a system of selecting talents layer by layer. Now, if a poor boy who can participate in the province test is killed by us, if the higher-ups of the Empire blame us, who can bear the consequences? Ridiculous! Just killing Lin Sun can cause such a big event as bloody 10 days. You think too highly of him, don't you? Hearing this, Qi Tianxing felt a headache. He couldn't help but sit up straight. He suddenly slammed the table and said with a stern look, Everyone, let me ask you one question. Can your opinions represent the opinions of the forces behind you? Qi Tianxing felt a headache when he heard this. He couldn't help but sit up straight. He slammed the table and said with a stern look, Everyone, I just want to ask you, can your opinions represent the opinions of the forces behind you? A trace of disdain flashed across Qi Tianxing's eyes. He said in a low voice, Remember, you are just representatives. What you need to do is to remember everything that happened tonight and then report it to the forces behind you. A trace of disdain flashed in Qi Tianxing's eyes. He said in a low voice, Remember, you are just representatives. What you need to do is to remember what happened tonight, and then go back and report it to the forces behind you. The implication was that they were just messengers. Don't think too highly of yourself. How dare you express your opinions without the consent of the forces behind you? All of a sudden, the atmosphere was much quieter. Qi Tianxing retracted his eyes and restored his original lazy look. He said, According to the plan, the action should have started. Just as he was speaking, a laughter that was gloomy and moist like a venomous snake suddenly sounded out from outside the window at the side of the platform. Young Master Qi is right. The target has been surrounded, and the slaughter is about to begin. Everyone, wait for a good show. It won't be long before I bring back that little fellow's head. Farewell. Hearing this voice, Qi Tianxing couldn't help but feel a chill. When he came to himself, the voice had completely disappeared. Looking at other practitioners in the field, they all showed different expressions, more or less showing a touch of disgust and fear. Is it residual wind? Someone couldn't help asking. Qi Tianxing nodded. Residual wind. A perverted and terrifying assassin. This person appeared and disappeared like a ghost, his movements swift and elusive. His hands were covered in blood, and it was rumored that in order to cultivate some kind of secret technique, this person had cruelly killed 108 children and used their blood as a medicinal catalyst to refine his secret technique. No one wanted to have any contact with such a person. But no one expected that Azure Light Pavilion invited residual wind to deal with Lin Sun this time. All of a sudden, many people looked at Qi Tianxing with a touch of surprise in their eyes. They couldn't figure out the relationship between residual wind and Azure Light Pavilion. Qi Tianxing didn't explain anything, but said with a smile, "Everyone, we can finally be sure that Lin Sun is doomed to die tonight. Let's wait for a good show." The cold wind and heavy rain poured down. Standing under the eaves in front of the courtyard, Chao Yunxiu said with a little excitement, "Those powerful dogs finally take action." Some practitioners of Qingyun society beside him were also overjoyed. "As long as Lin Sun dies tonight, we will start to spread the news. I'd like to see whether those powerful forces dare to make another bloody 10 days like the blood-slaughtering general did." Chao Yunxiu took a deep breath and said, "We poor people have been suppressed for too long. It's time to do something." "Brother Chao, if something like bloody 10 days really happens because of Lin Sun's death, I'm afraid it will also affect us, right?" Someone was worried. Chao Yunxiu sneered and said, "Don't worry. Today's empire is different from the past. Even if this kind of thing really happens, it is doomed to not affect us. Don't forget that we have signed up for the province test. The Empire is in need of manpower now and will never watch us be killed." After a pause, he looked at the distant night and said, "Let's wait and see. Whether Lin Sun is dead or alive, for us poor people, it is a magnificent act of resisting the oppression of the powerful forces, which is beneficial and harmless. Have you ever heard of a saying?" Everyone was stunned. Chao Yunxiu said to himself, "A spark can start a prairie fire." The governor's mansion. Late at night, Lu Wujuan was not in the mood to practice. He stood silently in the empty hall. Outside the window, the thunder was shaking and the lightning was dancing wildly. After a long time, Lu Wujuan murmured, "Cold wind, heavy rain, killing night. I hope they don't make too much noise, Mist College." In the same night, Dean Wei Lingzhen and Du Dongtu, the commander-in-chief of Xiling army, were sitting opposite each other and playing chess on the chessboard. "Those big forces in the city have gone too far." Du Dongtu suddenly threw away the chess piece in his hand and said with a frown. Wei Lingzhen was stunned and said, "Are you still concerned about that boy?" Du Dongtu said with displeasure, "This boy has outstanding strength and the blood of tigers and wolves. If he can join the army, he will become a famous general in the future. It will be a pity if he is killed." Wei Lingzhen thought for a while and said, "It's a pity indeed. But you and I can't intervene in this kind of thing." Du Dongtu sneered, "Oh, why?" Wei Lingzhen sighed and said, "I know you are unhappy, but if you intervene, you will inevitably offend those big forces in the city, which is not worth the loss." Du Dongtu said in a low voice, "I come from the military. It's not a big deal to offend these big families. Brother Wei, aren't you looking down on me too much?" Wei Lingzhen smiled bitterly. "I know you are not afraid of offending them. I'm worried that your intervention in this matter will put you in a bad situation in the future. Maybe these big forces in Mist City can't do anything to you, but what about those in the Forbidden City?" Du Dongtu was stunned. "How does it have anything to do with the Forbidden City?" Wei Lingzhen said, "Because you intervened in the dispute between a poor disciple and a powerful force. With your current identity, you saved a poor disciple. If those powerful forces in the Forbidden City knew it, how do you think they would feel?" Du Dongtu pondered for a moment and his expression changed slightly. He finally understood. This action against Lin seemed simple, but it contained a special meaning. It was no different from the conflict between the big forces and the poor at the bottom. If he intervened and stood on Lin's side, it would inevitably arouse the vigilance of other big forces, which could lead to serious consequences. "Don't think too much. Let's continue to play chess." Wei Lingzhen smiled and picked up the chess piece again. Du Dongtu's expression changed. After a while, he sighed, "I don't want to give up." Whoosh! Lin's figure was like a ghost. He quickly swept into an alley and kept galloping in the heavy rain. Behind him came the sound of chasing, which indicated that the enemy was approaching quickly. But Lin's expression was as calm as ice and snow. The cruel training in the bloodthirsty camp made him clear that any trace of panic might trigger unpredictable risk. His breathing was long and steady, and his running speed maintained a unique rhythm, which was the best way to save physical strength. At the same time, his soul perception spread out like a fine spider web, perceiving all the movements along the way. Whoosh! When passing by a low house, Lin suddenly stopped and fiercely chopped the eaves of the house with the black spirit saber in his hand. With a loud bang, the eaves of the house exploded. The sharp blade pierced through the eaves, and a scream was suddenly heard. Looking carefully, there was a figure hiding in the depths of the eaves. He was holding a crossbow in his hand, and his finger was already on the trigger. But he had no chance to shoot the arrow again, because Lin's saber cut off his throat with great precision as if it had eyes. All this happened in an instant. After Lin chopped, he didn't look at the man again and continued to rush forward. For Lin, who successfully graduated from the bloodthirsty camp, this kind of ambush was just a trick played by a waiter. It was not worth mentioning. Chapter 214. Running in the stormy night, Lin soon felt as if he had returned to the days when he was in the bloodthirsty camp, as if he was carrying out an actual combat training of breaking through the encirclement and killing. The environment was very bad, and he didn't know how many enemies there were. It seemed that no matter which direction he ran in, he might be attacked by the enemy. But for Lin Sun, this dangerous atmosphere made his blood surge. He was like a soldier who hadn't fought for a long time returning to the battlefield. Killing, smoke and blood were all familiar to him in the bloodthirsty camp. Lin soon found that the 1-year training life in the bloodthirsty camp had influenced him too much unconsciously. At least when facing danger, he didn't seem to feel fear and uneasiness anymore. It didn't take long for more than 10 practitioners to appear in Lin's spiritual perception. These practitioners were lying in ambush on both sides of the street thousands of meters away, hiding under the eaves, hiding in the corners of the alleys, or standing directly in the middle of the street. All of them looked solemn and ready for battle. The heavy rain and the dark night formed a natural camouflage, making their breaths obscure and their figures blurred. But for Lin Sun, all the camouflage was like a thin gauze, which was easily torn apart by his sharp and powerful spiritual perception and appeared in his mind. After perceiving all this, Lin Sun didn't choose to stop or retreat, but kept running at a unique pace. However, unlike before, his black eyes had become even deeper, and they inadvertently revealed traces of killing intent. In Lin Sun's body, the windstorm millstone suddenly sped up, producing a rumbling sound like a raging sea. If it was daytime, it could be clearly seen that Lin Sun's whole body was steaming with wisps of clear and glass-like azure mist. That was the vision that could only be produced when the gang spirit was pure and thick to the extreme. The target appeared. More than 10 practitioners lying in ambush on the long street all narrowed their eyes, and a thin figure as agile as lightning emerged in their minds. This made them all excited, and the killing intent in their hearts rose sharply. They were ready to attack and kill. Especially the 2 practitioners standing in the middle of the long street, they raised their sabers high and pointed to the distance, their faces full of excitement and killing intent. This time, whoever could kill the target would receive a reward of 1,000 gold coins. They had been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. Now that it had finally appeared, they would definitely not let their target have any chance of survival. The rumbling sound of the torrential rain pounded on the hard ground like drumbeats, creating an austere and tense atmosphere. The target was getting closer and closer, like a panicked beast that was about to walk right into a trap. The thin man standing in the middle of the street couldn't help but lick his lips, his eyes emitting dense killing intent. When the target was only a few hundred meters away from them, the thin man was unable to restrain the killing intent in his heart any longer, and he suddenly took a deep breath and was about to shout out explosively. However, right at this instant, a rumbling that shook the heavens and the earth resounded abruptly. It was like a thunderclap that had risen from the ground, and it shook the gaunt man to the point his entire body trembled, while he felt an unprecedented feeling of terror from inside out. The words that had just arrived at the tip of his tongue were actually forcefully stopped by this voice, and he was unable to continue speaking. Because this sound wasn't really thunder, but it came from the target's body. Rumble! A terrifying storm vortex had suddenly surged into appearance from the target's body, and it shot into the sky. The torrential rain that covered the sky was actually swept into the vortex and emanated deafening rumbling. When looked at from afar, the target seemed to have vanished, and only a storm vortex that was over 100 m tall remained. It carried along a torrential rain that covered the sky, and its impetus was boundlessly terrifying. What's this? It wasn't just the gaunt man. Even all the cultivators lying in ambush in the surroundings of the street revealed shocked expressions at this instant, and they were greatly shocked in their hearts. An indescribable aura of danger spread through every single one of their bodies like tidewater, and it was on the verge of drowning them. Shit! Attack! Attack! Quickly! The gaunt man at the center of the street let out a long and grim howl. However, in merely an instant, his voice was dispersed and eliminated by the terrifying rumbling of the storm. Rumble! At this moment, it was like a storm had passed through, and an unimaginably violent force rumbled as it swept through the street, causing the air to explode and the ground to be crushed into powder. The rain that shot out from the storm was like numerous peerlessly sharp arrows that covered the heavens and the earth as they shot violently towards the surroundings. Puff, puff, puff in the blink of an eye, the nearby buildings were riddled with holes, and the ear-piercing screams that sounded like the shrill cries of ghosts and gods resounded continuously in this world that was shrouded in darkness. Bang! The gaunt man at the center of the street had tried his best to defend himself, but in just an instant, his defense was torn apart like a piece of paper. His whole body seemed to be cut by thousands of blades, and his flesh and blood were cut into pieces. He fell to the ground with a loud crash. His two companions next to him were also not spared and suffered the same fate. If one looked carefully, one could see that the bodies of the practitioners hiding under the eaves, on the roofs, and in the shadows of the alleys were all pierced by the bursting rainwater and fell to the ground silently. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. When the storm passed through, it was indeed like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves, leaving not a single blade of grass behind. It was likely that these Xiozhi did not even know how the enemy managed to do this, and why this storm whirlpool was so terrifying. Of course, Lin Sun didn't have the chance to tell them that this was the power of Storm Millstone, a kind of terrible power that was different from most of the first-class pawns of spiritual power in the world. Of course, this was also the first time that Lin Sun showed his real power after he reached the human gang realm. The previous duels with Yuan Shu and Qi Yunxiao were not real killings at all, so he didn't have the chance to show such power. When witnessing the amazing power produced at this moment, Lin Sun was also amazed and had a further understanding of his special pawns of spiritual power. What was the ultimate purpose of Bai Lingshi, Zhao Yin, and Li Duxing to enter the bloodthirsty camp? Wasn't it to condense the best pawns of spiritual power in the gang-producing lake? It could be seen how important it was to have a first-class pawns of spiritual power in the gang spirit realm. Compared with the ordinary practitioners in the world, Lin Sun's Storm Millstone was naturally far superior to theirs. Just like now, some of these practitioners from the big forces in Mist City might have reached the human gang realm many years ago, but how could they compare with Lin Sun in terms of cultivation foundation and the grade of pond of spiritual power they owned? Without too much emotion, Lin Sun continued to run forward. If he wanted to kill all the enemies, he must first break through the enemy's encirclement. In this way, his situation and identity would be transformed. He would no longer be the prey, but the hunter. Instead of being surrounded, He could take advantage of the different terrain environment to attack and assassinate the enemy. Lin Sun was very sure that he hadn't broken through the encirclement yet, because the real masters hadn't appeared yet. According to the information he had, there were many powerful figures in the Earthgang realm among the practitioners who came to deal with him tonight. Chang Henshui and Lu Zhong, the right-hand men of Azure Light Pavilion, were such fierce figures. Not long after Lin Sun left, a group of practitioners chased him from behind. When they saw the devastated streets, many practitioners couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. The torrential rain was unable to completely wash away the blood on the ground. Corpses died miserably in different ways at different places. Even the streets and houses seemed to have been fiercely crushed by an invisible hand, and they became riddled with holes and were beyond recognition. Such a soul-stirring and bloody scene caused many practitioners to stop in their tracks and inhale sharply. What kind of terrible power could be used to achieve this? Some sharp-eyed people even found from the signs on the scene that their companions were killed at the same time. This shocked them and made their hair stand on end. For the first time, they deeply realized that the enemy who had defeated Yuan Shu and Qi Yunxiao was not as simple as they thought. In other words, they were all careless. They thought that it would be easy to deal with a human gang realm teenager with so many forces and such a big battle array. Who would have thought that the target's fighting power was so terrible? Many people became vigilant, restrained their carelessness, and became careful. They suddenly found that tonight's night seemed to be longer than usual. Just when some practitioners were shocked, Lin Sun met a strong opponent for the first time in this rainy night raid. This was a middle-aged man with a thick figure and a steady temperament. He held a dark golden spear in his hand, looking like a brave warrior from the battlefield, and his whole body was releasing a strong gang spirit. Different from the human gang realm practitioners, this man's gang chi was so thick that it was like a substance, showing a unique aura that was in harmony with the earth. This was the momentum of Earth Gang realm practitioners. Kill! When noticing Lin Sun's appearance, the honest middle-aged man showed his experienced fighting experience. With a loud shout, he rushed to Lin Sun with a dark golden spear in his hand. He was fierce, direct and ruthless like an iron horse. The dark golden spear stirred up the void airflow, wrapped in dazzling golden light, just like a ray of golden light flying from the sky, with great power. Clang! Lin Sun was caught off guard and could only fight against it. The black spirit saber collided with the dark golden spear, producing an ear-piercing sound. It was like two mountains colliding with each other. The terrible power made Lin Sun's hand numb and his figure shake. He was suddenly awestruck. Was this the power of an Earth Gang realm practitioner? Compared with Lin Sun, the honest middle-aged man was even more surprised. This blow of his could easily kill most human gang realm practitioners. Who would have thought that the opposite boy not only withstood this blow, but also looked unscathed? Kill! Although he was surprised, the honest middle-aged man's action was not slow. When he failed to hit Lin Sun, he swept the spear in his hand and attacked again. Boom! The void seemed to have been crushed and collapsed by this attack, producing a terrifying sonic boom. But this time, before the blow fell, Lin Sun had already taken action. With a twist of his body, he exerted strength from his waist and smashed the wall of a building beside him with his shoulder. His figure flashed and he darted into the hole in the wall, disappearing. Almost at the moment when Lin Sun left, an arrow appeared quietly in the place where he was standing and broke a bottomless hole in the ground. At the same time, the honest middle-aged man also noticed this scene, and his face changed slightly. He finally realized that Lin Sun was not forced to retreat by him, but had to escape because Lin Sun perceived the danger from the dark. What made the honest middle-aged man most palpitate was that he didn't notice the silent arrow from beginning to end. Chapter 2:15. The honest middle-aged man was Lu Zhong, a practitioner in the army who had just retired from the frontline battlefield of the Empire not long ago. He was calm, experienced, and rigorous. As soon as he joined the Azure Light Pavilion, He was highly valued, and became an important follower like Chang Henshui. Originally, Lu Zhong didn't take the action tonight seriously. He thought that he didn't have to deal with a human gang realm teenager in person. However, when he collided head-on with the young man and noticed that the young man didn't fall into a disadvantaged position before his attacks, Lu Zhong suddenly realized that the young man was extraordinary indeed. Especially at this moment, Lu Zhong had actually noticed an ambush that was hidden in the shadows a step in advance, whereas he hadn't noticed it at all. This caused Lu Zhong to be unable to help but feel shocked in his heart, and his expression suddenly became solemn. The strength of the human gang realm teenager once again broke his expectation and even made him feel threatened. However, as a strong soldier with rich combat experience, Lu Zhong's reaction was extremely fast. The moment he noticed that Lin Sun hit the wall to escape, he had already blown a whistle. A strand of strange sound that sounded like the choking of a flute resounded, and it swiftly spread out amidst the pitch-black and stormy night. This was a signal for help. Immediately, Lu Zhong took a deep breath and chased after Lin Sun with a dark golden spear in his hand. If this scene was noticed by other practitioners, it would cause a great uproar. Lu Zhong was a powerful Earthgang practitioner, but he sent out a signal for help at this moment, which undoubtedly proved that he also felt great danger in this action of hunting Lin Sun. Almost at the same time, on the top of a tall building thousands of meters away from the place where Lin Sun and Lu Zhong fought, a vague gray figure was crawling. In the rainstorm night, it was almost impossible to detect his existence. What a powerful little guy! His soul perception seems to be stronger than that of Earthgang realm practitioners. It's incredible. The gray figure sat up from the ground and murmured softly. His voice was gloomy like the hissing of a poisonous snake, revealing a strange and chilling feeling. At this time, a dazzling lightning suddenly crossed the night sky. It could be clearly seen that the gray figure was a young man with pale skin and long cheeks. His pupils revealed a devilish grayish-brown color, his lips were thin like blades, and they seemed as if they were smeared with dense scarlet rouge. Strands of gray spirit light seethed around his body, causing his aura to be indistinct, blurry, and illusory. The most horrifying thing about it was the large bow he held in his arms. The entire bow seemed to be formed from numerous fist-sized skulls, and the bowstring was scarlet red like blood and suffused with a savage and ruthless aura. This man was Residual Wind. He was a perverted killer who walked in the dark and was hated and feared by many powerful practitioners in Mist City. Residual Wind was a little surprised that he failed to assassinate Lin Sun twice in a row tonight. He found for the first time that it was more troublesome to deal with a human gang realm practitioner than to assassinate an Earth gang realm practitioner. This was very unusual. Don't do it more than 3 times. Little guy, the next time I make a move, it will be the time of your death. In the gloomy and low voice, Residual Wind got up and glanced at the distance with his grayish-brown eyes. Then, like a bat, he suddenly glided across the night sky and flashed silently and quickly in the rainstorm with a mysterious arc in the rainstorm night. Lu Zhong searched for the breath of his opponent and kept moving forward. But as time went by, he gradually frowned. Under the washing of the rainstorm, the breath of his opponent became vague and almost impossible to capture. Until now, he even suspected that his opponent had already broken through the encirclement and escaped. At this moment, Lu Zhong seemed to notice something. He suddenly stopped and looked at a house on the side of the street. The door of the house was closed, but Lu Zhong was keenly aware that there was a very familiar breath hidden inside. Without any hesitation, Lu Zhong stepped on the ground and rushed up like an arrow leaving the bow. The dark golden spear in his hand burst out a dazzling light and fiercely hacked at the house. He planned to use brute force to destroy the house and force his opponent out. Rumble! However, right at the instant that Lu Zhong made a move, the tightly shut door to the room suddenly exploded into pieces, and then a myriad of arrows shot out from within. They were like an expanse of a burning sunset that suddenly erupted amidst the torrential rain of the night. The scorching dawn crossbow. Lu Zhong's eyes narrowed, and he remained calm in the midst of chaos. He waved the dark golden spear, and a wave of collisions resounded as all the arrows were blocked. However, the might of the arrows was extremely strong. Even with Lu Zhong's cultivation, he was still blasted back while the vital energy and blood within his body roiled. When Lu Zhong's figure had just steadied himself and shattered the last arrow, a strange saber howl suddenly resounded. The saber howl was ethereal like the sound of nature. It seemed to be without any might, but it caused Lu Zhong's mind to be dazed. It was as if numerous dazzling stars had appeared before his eyes and were falling from the eternal night. It was like the end of the world had arrived, and everything was collapsing. It was filled with the aura of destruction and despair. What's this? Lu Zhong was shocked. The will that he had cultivated through many years of battles made him instantly sense a fatal danger. Under the stimulation of this danger, Lu Zhong suddenly roared and waved the dark golden spear to strike fiercely in all directions. Rumble, the void was in disorder. The phenomenon of stars falling suddenly exploded, and all the illusions disappeared like paper. However, a saber light that seemed to come from the eternal night swept over from the chaos, and it struck Lu Zhong in an unstoppable manner. With a puff, Lu Zhong felt a sharp pain all over his body. His chest was torn open by the saber light. Blood sprayed out, and his internal organs seemed to be crushed. Lu Zhong couldn't help but let out a shrill cry of pain. After that, he flew out and smashed on the rain-covered ground in an embarrassing manner. This is the power of realm? Lu Zhong uttered a terrified voice, and his pale face was full of disbelief. The saber's strike just now was full of unimaginable magical power, which was extremely similar to the power of realm that only practitioners of Tao Insight Realm could master. At this time, Lin Sun's figure appeared quietly and walked towards Lu Zhong. Impossible! It's absolutely impossible. You are only in the human gang realm. How can you master such unparalleled power? Lu Zhong seemed to be deeply stimulated at this moment. There were signs of madness all over his body. He had indeed lost control of his mind. As a strong practitioner of Earthgang realm, he was seriously injured and almost killed by a young man of Humangang realm. How could he accept this? What kind of saber strike was it? Lu Zhong still couldn't help trembling and panicking at the thought of it. From the beginning to the end, Lin Sun remained calm and ignored Lu Zhong's abnormal emotions. When he was only 10 meters away from Lu Zhong, he suddenly stopped. Bang! From Lin Sun's left sleeve, a bunch of burning crossbow bolts like sunset glow burst out, covering Lu Zhong's whole body. Lu Zhong was an Earthgang realm practitioner. Even if he was seriously injured and dying at this moment, he could never be underestimated. In order to avoid the counterattack of Lu Zhong, it was undoubtedly the best choice to use a short crossbow. Lu Zhong screamed miserably. His whole body was pierced like a hornet's nest, riddled with holes, and finally died on the ground unwillingly. Chi! But before Lin Sun could breathe a sigh of relief, an extremely subtle fluctuation suddenly sounded in the air, which made his face change slightly. He suddenly dodged to one side. With a puff, an arrow silently brushed past Lin Sun's shoulder and fell to the ground, creating a bottomless hole. It was that damned guy again! The burning and tingling feeling from his shoulder made Lin Sun angry. This was the third time that he had been attacked tonight. His opponent was like a haunting ghost, which was disgusting. But different from the previous 2 times, this time Lu Zhong didn't kill Lin Sun, and his opponent didn't stop. Chi! Chi! Before Lin Sun's dodging body could stand firm, the 2 small sounds sounded in the air again. 2 arrows shot at him from different angles silently, tricky, fierce, and accurate. At this moment, Lin Sun was surprisingly calm. His body suddenly curled up and bounced on the ground like a meatball, and suddenly shot towards the house on one side. With a puff, He felt a burning and tingling pain on his back, as if his skin had been pierced by a sharp awl, and blood flowed out. Lin soon staggered and rushed into the house on one side like a gourd rolling on the ground. But it wasn't completely safe. The house was not big. At this moment it seemed to be covered by a rain of arrows, and the walls were full of holes. Finally, the house collapsed and burst into pieces. The rain of arrows disappeared, and everything fell into a dead silence. Only the heavy rain poured down and beat against the broken walls. Unknowingly, Residual Wind's blurry gray figure walked out of the rain. He came to the collapsed house and stood there quietly. His gray-brown eyes were glowing with a strange luster, constantly glancing at the house that had been turned into ruins. His sudden attack had locked all the surroundings of the house. He was extremely sure that Lin Sun couldn't escape at all. In other words, in Residual Wind's view, Lin Sun must have died in his rain of arrows. You forced me to use all my means. Little guy, you can die without regret, Residual Wind murmured and walked into the ruins. He needed to cut off Lin Sun's head so that he could get the reward. Whoosh! Soon, Residual Wind pulled out a dead body from the ruins. To his surprise, the dead body was not Lin Sun, but a frightened and helpless middle-aged man. His body was covered with arrows, and his flesh was badly mutilated. Shit! Residual Wind's face suddenly changed. Rumble! A wisp of a blade suddenly flashed out from beneath the ruins. It was like a star had risen from beneath the ground, and it emanated a soul-stirring glow. Chapter 216. The saber light was as dazzling as the stars. In an instant, Remnant Wind's expression changed abruptly. He let out a shrill scream and dodged to the side at an incredible speed. But this saber light was even faster. With a puff, his left arm was cut off, and blood sprayed like a waterfall. Damn it! Remnant Wind screamed in pain, and his pale face was almost transparent. Boom! At the same time, Lin Sun rushed out of the ground and chopped again without hesitation. He hated the assassin who had attacked him 3 times in a row, so as soon as he made a move, he used his strongest move, reaching for the stars. A strand of natural sound of saber rang out. When the saber was chopped out, it was like the falling stars in the eternal night, with a majestic momentum that could destroy everything. After advancing to the human gang realm, the power of RFS had also changed dramatically. It was more than twice as powerful as before. Under such circumstances, Lu Zhong, an Earth Gang realm practitioner, was inevitably seriously injured and on the verge of death. At this time, Lin Sun performed this strike again. Under this strike, it was like being submerged by thousands of falling stars in the night sky. Its power was terrifying and immeasurable. Remnant Wind screamed again, and his figure suddenly turned into a gray blurred shadow. He was about to escape far away. But how could he escape? The power condensed by this strike made him like a lone boat in the vast sea. In just a moment, he was covered by the raging waves all over the sky. With a bang, Remnant Wind's body was like a broken sandbag. He was fiercely knocked out and fell on the street dozens of meters away. He coughed up blood and screamed in pain. Who are you? Seeing Lin Sun coming again, Remnant Wind couldn't help screaming in horror. He struggled to get up, but he had already lost his left arm and was seriously injured by RFS. His whole body showed signs of collapse inside and outside. Lin Sun squatted down and looked at Residual Wind carefully with a hint of sarcasm on his lip. He said in surprise, "I didn't expect that your assassination skill is so powerful, but you are only in the human gang realm. It's really unexpected. Aren't you the same? You killed Lu Zhong of Earth Gang realm with the cultivation of human gang realm. There are few young human gang realm practitioners like you in the whole empire who can do this." Remnant Wind breathed heavily. His eyes were full of resentment, fear, unwillingness, and hatred. "I'm not praising you. I'm just very curious. How exactly did you cultivate your archery?" Lin Sun said thoughtfully. He was really curious. According to his inference, Residual Wind's cultivation was just average. If they fought face to face, Residual Wind would not be his opponent even without using RFS. However, Remnant Wind had mastered an extremely powerful archery skill, which could be seen from the 3 assassination attempts tonight. It would be a piece of cake for Remnant Wind to assassinate an Earthgang realm cultivator like Lu Zhong. Unexpectedly, as soon as Lin Sun said this, Residual Wind's eyes flashed a touch of panic. He snapped, "Don't talk nonsense. Kill me if you dare. But I warn you, my sister is now working for a big shot in the Forbidden City of the Empire. If she knows I'm dead, you won't live long either." Lin Sun sneered. Without any nonsense, he directly pierced Residual Wind's throat with his saber. Residual Wind's eyes suddenly widened, and his face was full of astonishment. It seemed that he couldn't believe that Lin Sun was so daring to kill him. Bang! In the end, he silently lay on the ground, completely dead. "How dare you threaten me before you die? If I don't kill you, I'm really a coward." Lin Sun pulled out his saber and was about to leave. Suddenly, an idea occurred to him. He searched Residual Wind's body. He wanted to see what kind of bow this man, who was proficient in archery and assassination, used. To Lin Sun's surprise, he found nothing on Residual Wind after searching for a long time. He didn't even find a copper coin, let alone a bow and arrow. How could this be? Lin Sun frowned and inadvertently glanced at Residual Wind's eyes. He immediately found that there was a strange gray luster in Residual Wind's left eye, which was obviously different from his right eye. Lin Sun immediately dug out Residual Wind's left eye with his saber. After the rainstorm washed away the blood stains on the eyeball, Lin Sun saw clearly that it was not an eyeball, but a pigeon egg-sized bead covered with a gray luster. The bead was very light. Lin Sun held it in his hand like holding a ball of cotton, as light as a feather. Looking carefully, under the gray surface, an obscure and violent spirit was faintly surging. The moment Lin Sun looked at the gray bead, he was shocked and felt an inexplicable chill all over his body, as if there was an ancient demon hidden in the bead, staring at him and frightening his soul. The sound just now came from over there. At this time, a shout came from afar, which woke Lin Sun up. He had no time to investigate further, and threw the gray bead into the small summer ring. Looking at the bodies of Residual Wind and Lu Zhong on the ground, a cold light flashed in Lin Sun's eyes. The next moment, he flashed away, carrying the 2 bodies, and soon disappeared in the vast rainy night. Whoosh! Before long, a group of practitioners arrived. "There was a big fight just now, and the target is nearby." Looking at the blood stains on the street and the collapsed houses nearby, a practitioner said excitedly, "Chase." Other practitioners also rubbed their hands and rushed to the distance. Only a man in a dark green robe stayed. He stood there in silence, carefully examining the scene of the battle. The heavy rain poured down, but before it got close to the man, it was shaken away by an invisible force, making his clothes clean and tidy, which made him look very different. This man was Chong Henshui, a follower of Azure Light Pavilion with Earthgang realm cultivation. Among the followers of Azure Light Pavilion, his status was even higher than Lu Zhong's. As time went by, Chong Henshui gradually frowned, and his expression became more and more serious. There were too many incredible traces left on the scene of the battle. If he guessed right, Lu Zhong was very likely to be dead. This was too terrible. Lu Zhong was a practitioner of Earthgang realm from the army. He had experienced hundreds of battles and was shrewd and alert. Even Chong Henshui thought that among all the followers of Azure Light Pavilion, only Lu Zhong could be valued by him. But now such a master was very likely to be killed by a teenager of Human Gang realm, which was a bit shocking. And Chong Henshui noticed that there were traces left by an assassin in the battlefield, which were all over the place. It was hard not to notice them. By analyzing the trajectories of which arrows were shot, Chong Henshui was surprised and doubtful. There was no doubt that the assassin's technique was extremely brilliant, but in the end it seemed that he didn't succeed. Lin Sun. Lin Sun. Chang Henshui kept repeating the name in his heart, as if the name had some kind of magic, which made him feel a kind of pressure for tonight's action for the first time. This kind of pressure was very dangerous and lingering. Chang Henshui even hesitated whether he should continue to chase Lin Sun or not. In the end, Chang Henshui sighed in his heart and continued to move forward. He was just a follower. Maybe he had a high status in Azure Light Pavilion, but only he knew that he was just a dog raised by Azure Light Pavilion. If the dog fled in the face of battle, it would inevitably be abandoned or killed by its master. This was the sorrow of being born in a poor family. No matter how high one's cultivation was, he could only rely on the forces of the rich and powerful. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to get ahead in this life. Chang Henshui was not young anymore. He was very clear about the cruelty of reality. The whole empire was a cage controlled by the royal family and the upper class of the rich and powerful. If one wanted to survive in the cage, he must be obedient like a bird in the cage. For tonight's action, Chang Henshui occasionally admired Lin Sun. At least this young man from a poor family dared to fight against the forces of the rich and powerful and did not yield to the fate. Of course, we have to continue the action tonight. But even if they know it, they won't blame me for not making any effort. Chang Henshui paced forward. He was indeed taking action, but no one knew that he had actually given up the plan of fighting with Lin Sun. Bang! In a magnificent palace, the gate was pushed open fiercely. Brother Fei, here comes our chance. Yao Susu rushed into the palace with a touch of excitement on her face. What chance? Lian Fei, who was practicing calmly, suddenly opened his eyes and asked in surprise. The situation is much better than we expected. More than a dozen forces in Mist City have already launched an action to kill Lin Sun half an hour ago. Yao Susu beamed with joy. At the end of her words, she couldn't help sighing with emotion. Unfortunately, Mist City is not the territory of Yao family after all. I got the news a little late. Otherwise, we could have planned in advance. More than a dozen forces are going to deal with Lin Sun together? Lian Fei's eyes suddenly brightened. He stood up and said, Lin Sun will definitely die without the help of Tingyu Tower. Let's go and have a look. No. Yao Susu stopped him and said, Don't forget what I said. A man of noble status shouldn't sit under the eaves. Although more than a dozen forces joined forces tonight, almost all the practitioners they sent out were followers. Their real clansmen didn't come out. I think you know the reason. They think it's not worth sending their own people just to deal with Lin Sun. Lian Fei frowned and said impatiently, It's really troublesome for these forces to deal with Lin Sun. Yao Susu smiled and said, This is the reason why the forces can stand until now. Why should they do it themselves when they can let others do it? Even if something unexpected happens, the one who dies isn't a disciple of a powerful force, so why not? Lian Fei said impatiently, Susu, tell us what we should do. Yao Susu took a deep breath and said with blazing eyes, It's very simple. Let Rain-Tasting Tower send assassins. Didn't they say 10,000 imperial gold coins? As long as they guarantee that Lin Sun was killed by them, I don't mind paying them 10,000 imperial gold coins. Chapter 217. 10,000 gold coins. For those big forces it was a huge fortune. Hearing that Yao Susu wanted to exchange for the Tingyu Tower's help at such a price, Lian Fei suddenly hesitated in his heart. Susu, those big forces have already taken action. Even if we don't get involved, Lin Sun will die. Why waste so much money to hire killers? Lian Fei didn't understand. Brother Fei, if we want to have a foothold in Mist City in the future, we will inevitably have to deal with other forces. The action of killing Lin Sun provides us with an opportunity to make friends with other forces. Yao Susu said quickly, As long as Lin Sun dies in our hands, we will not only avenge you, but also take this opportunity to win the favor of other forces. It's killing two birds with one stone. Lien Fei still frowned. Do we have to spend 10,000 gold coins just to make friends with other forces? Yao Susu sighed and said, Brother Fei, this is Miss City, the capital of Southwest Province. It's a rare opportunity to make friends with those forces by spending a fortune. Seeing that Lien Fei wanted to say something more, Yao Susu directly made a decision. Well, it's decided. Lien Fei was angry, but when he saw Yao Susu's indifferent and calm eyes, his heart trembled and he dared not say anything more. Tingyu Tower. In an antique room, Tingyu, dressed in a green Confucian robe, sat cross-legged with a calm and indifferent temperament. She was playing the zither, and the sound was lonely and cold. Outside the window, the heavy rain was like a waterfall and the thunder was surging, but it couldn't suppress the lonely sound of the zither. Your Excellency, shall we take action? Outside the door, a respectful voice sounded. Clang! The sound of the zither in the room suddenly made a high-pitched syllable, and then fell into silence. The city is shrouded in murderous spirit tonight. Lin Sun is doomed, but the employer insists on doing this. I'm afraid there's a reason for it. Ting Yu's sweet and low voice came from the room. Have you found out who the employer is? It seems to have something to do with Yao Tuahai, a great practitioner. The respectful voice answered. Yao Tuah Ting Yu's voice became ethereal, and she said after a long time, Since it's related to Yao Tuahai, let residual snow, ghost moon and gray marten take action now. Yes. The respectful voice accepted the order and left. In a dark basement in Mist City. Sitting cross-legged, Lin Sun swallowed a bottle of sapphire gang refining pills and began to regulate his breath without hesitation. Fighting all the way tonight had consumed a lot of Lin's energy. Especially when he killed Lu Zhong and Residual Wind. He used RFS twice in a row, which almost exhausted his physical strength. The power of RFS was extremely terrible, but it also consumed a lot of gang spirit. Lin Sun was now in the human gang realm, which was completely different from the past. But he still felt a little overwhelmed after using RFS twice in a row. Lin Sun had to seize all the time to restore his physical strength. This basement was prepared by Chu Feng for Lin Sun. There were more than a dozen hiding places like this in Mist City. These hiding places had been prepared long before tonight, all for the purpose of providing a temporary shelter for Lin Sun. While cultivating, Lin Sun sensed the condition of his body. There were several scars on his body, all of which were caused by battles. But they were not serious and had no impact on the battle. Next, it's my turn to fight back, Lin Sun murmured in his heart. After killing Lu Zhong and Residual Wind, he finally broke through the heavy encirclement. Now he only needed to wait for his physical strength to recover, and then he could come back and kill them. In this way, his situation had changed. He was no longer a prey, but a hunter. After 30 minutes, Lin Sun's physical strength recovered, and he began to check the remaining equipment on his body. 3 burning glow crossbows, 2 black spirit sabers, more than a dozen bottles of medicine, and some miscellaneous items for fighting. According to Lin Sun's estimation, as long as he didn't meet an extremely difficult opponent, these war materials were enough to support him until dawn. What? Inadvertently, Lin Sun once again noticed the gray bead stored in his small summer ring. What on earth was this thing? Lin Sun took it in his hand and played with it. For a moment, he felt a familiar cold and throbbing breath in his heart, as if he was stared at by an ancient demon, which frightened his soul. Suddenly, Lin Sun ran meditating magic and visualized the image of eternal starry sky and thousands of stars competing for glory in his sea of consciousness to guard his mind. In a flash, the cold and throbbing breath suddenly collapsed and disappeared without a trace. Lin Sun's consciousness and mind also became spotless, ethereal and clean. At this time, he suddenly noticed that the gray bead in his hand had quietly changed. The bead surged with spiritual light like the gray sea, and gradually evolved into the shape of a big bow. At first glance, it seemed that there was a magic bow sealed inside the bead, which was about to break out of the shell and overturn the mountains and seas. Lin soon thought of something and released a wisp of gang energy from his fingertips, which poured into the gray bead. Buzz! Suddenly, the gray bead changed into a bow and appeared in Lin Sun's palm. Lin Sun was shocked. This scene was too magical. It was the first time for him to see a mysterious bead that could turn into a big bow in a twinkling of an eye. What kind of treasure was this on earth? Among all the spiritual weapons in the world, it seemed that only the armors with spiritual tattoos could be sealed in a small bead in such a magical way. But this was clearly not the armors with spiritual tattoos. It was just a bow. That was too strange. Soon, Lin Sun's eyes were attracted by it. The bow was extremely ferocious. It was composed of skulls, and it was filled with a violent and cold breath that made people's hearts palpitate. The bowstring was a bewitching blood-red color. The white hole on the body of the bow and the blood-like slender bowstring formed an extremely soul-stirring scene when they were put together. But when he held it in his hand, it was as light as a feather. Moreover, when he looked carefully at this bow, besides being ferocious and terrifying, it actually gave off a natural sense of beauty. It was as if it wasn't forged by man, but a spiritual object born from the heavens and the earth. Lin Sun tried to hold the bow and pull the bowstring. When the bowstring was fully pulled, Lin Sun felt a cold breath flowing through his body from the bow. In a trance, the world seemed to become different in front of him. He could see the extremely fine dust floating in the air, the slow flow of the air in the dark, and a mayfly larva sleeping in the corner of the wall. More than that, Lin Sun could feel that all his emotions seemed to disappear, leaving only calmness like ice and snow. In this extreme calmness, it seemed that as long as he wanted, he could kill any opponent with this bow. This feeling was so strong that Lin Sun doubted that at this moment, he seemed to be incarnated as a god with unparalleled archery skills that could overlook the world. This feeling was so wonderful that it made people want to immerse themselves in it. But in the deepest part of Lin Sun's heart, there was an uncontrollable vigilance. No. The bow seemed to be affecting him. Lin Sun gritted his teeth and recovered from the state of extreme calmness in an instant. He couldn't help but gasp for a while. Only then did he find that the back of his clothes had been soaked with cold sweat. When he looked at the weird bow in his hand again, Lin Sun's eyes had changed slightly, with a touch of deep shock and fear. It could affect the mind and occupy the will of practitioners. What kind of bow was it? Lin Sun wondered why residual wind, whose cultivation was only ordinary, was so amazing in assassination. Now he finally understood that everything was because of this bow. In that state of extreme calmness, with the help of the mysterious power contained in the bow, ordinary practitioners could indeed exert unimaginable power. But Lin Sun was extremely afraid of it. This bow could affect the mind and even occupy the will of practitioners as if it had intelligence, which made people have to be vigilant. If it took the opportunity to occupy the body, the consequences would be unimaginable. What's more, Lin Sun found that the action of pulling the bow just now made his spiritual power show signs of weakness as if it had been swallowed. In other words, if he used the bow carelessly, it was very likely to cause great damage to his spiritual power. Taking a deep breath, Lin Sun looked at the bow carefully again. This time, he used the power of perception. In a trance, he seemed to come to a boundless gray wasteland. A bow was suspended under the sky, releasing a cold aura that deterred all things. Suddenly, the space extremely far away in the sky exploded into pieces as an enormous ancient roaring dragon that was like a winding mountain appeared out of thin air. As soon as it appeared, it roared into the sky, and its roar was like a thunderclap that shattered numerous mountains while emanating monstrous ferocious might. But at this time, the big bow suspended under the sky suddenly glowed with a touch of gray luster. The bowstring was suddenly pulled to the full and shot out an illusory light. In an instant, the enormous body of the ancient roaring dragon beast that was like a mountain was like a piece of paper, and it silently transformed into a bloody froth that dyed the sky red. An arrow shot out soundlessly, and a ferocious hoe dragon silently fell to the ground. Its mountainous body completely turned into a bloody mist, and disappeared without a sound. This was a kind of silent and shocking power. There was no earth-shattering roar, but a kind of soul-stirring shock. Lin Sun held his breath and suddenly woke up. All the illusions disappeared, leaving only the weird bow lying quietly in his palm, revealing an indescribable mysterious color. Almost at the same time, a name that he had never heard of appeared in his mind, Woody. Woody? Was it the name of this bow? Chapter 218. In the dark basement, Lin Sun held the insignificance bow in his hand and stared at it, lost in thought. After a while, he suddenly took a deep breath and ran the meditating magic. While visualizing the star circulation, he pulled the bowstring, which was as red as blood again. In an instant, a familiar cold breath spread all over his body, making Lin Sun's consciousness and emotions fall into a kind of extreme calmness. Different from the last time, this time Lin Sun developed the mystery of star circulation with his mind to guard his mind, which produced an incredible effect. He could no longer feel the feeling of being occupied in his mind and will. With the operation of star circulation, Lin Sun still maintained extreme calmness like ice and snow. The insignificant bow in his hand trembled slightly, as if it was bowing down to the bow and waking up from the silence of countless years. In a trance, Lin Sun had a feeling that he was connected with the bow by blood, and could use it as freely as his own arm. Buzz! As soon as he loosened his fingertips, the fully drawn bowstring suddenly burst out an almost illusory fuzzy gray light, tearing the void silently. At this moment, Lin Sun only felt that about 20% of his gang spirit was suddenly drawn away, and about 10% of his soul perception was also consumed due to fluctuations. With a slight sound, a bottomless hole was shot on the ground. Lin Sun narrowed his eyes and recovered from his extreme calmness. He stepped forward and looked at the hole. The edge of the hole was smooth and tidy. It was difficult for Lin Sun to find out how deep the hole was with his current perceptive power, but it was at least 3,000 meters away. Because the current range of Lin Sun's soul perception was about 3,000 meters. One shot consumes 20% of my cultivation and 10% of my soul perception power, Lin Sun quickly calculated in his mind. According to his current cultivation, he could barely pull the bow about 5 times. He suddenly remembered that when he was stabbed by residual wind, this guy had shot hundreds of times with this bow at the last moment. It seems that if I want to fully control this bow, there must be a unique secret method. Otherwise, according to residual wind's cultivation of human gang realm, it is difficult to do this. Lin Sun pondered. This insignificance bow was incredibly powerful and full of mysterious colors. It could be called a rare treasure. If he was able to completely control it, then he would definitely be able to obtain unimaginable effects when assassinating or ambushing enemies. Suddenly, an extremely soft sound of footsteps rang out from the basement door. Lin Sun felt a chill in his heart. In an instant, he detected that a black shadow was approaching outside the basement door. The shadow's breath was restrained, like a ghost walking in the dark. If Lin hadn't happened to check the hole in the ground with his soul perception, he wouldn't have been able to find the shadow. An expert? Not necessarily, but at the very least, in terms of stealth, this black shadow's performance was extremely outstanding. With a faint smile on his lips, Lin Sun quietly pulled open the insignificance bow in his hand. The blood-red bowstring glowed with a strange color in the dark environment. The bow, composed of a string of white skulls, emitted obscure gray light, which shrouded Lin Sun's figure and made it distorted and blurred. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk the bowstring suddenly shot out, and a gray invisible spirit arrow silently streaked across the air like an illusion, piercing through the tightly shut door of the basement. Puff! There was a dull thud outside the door. Lin Sun put away the insignificance bow and rushed out in a flash. It was raining heavily outside, and there was a dead body lying in the pool of water on the ground. It was a very thin man with a bloody hole in his chest. Lin Sun squatted down and carefully looked at the man's wound. He found that the man's vitality had long been cut off, and his flesh and blood were covered with a layer of gray, like a withered tree. What a terrible power! This bow can still exert such a strong power without the help of arrows. It's really magical. At this moment, Lin Sun had a further understanding of the power of the insignificance bow. After thinking about it, Lin Sun didn't hesitate. His figure flashed and rushed into the distant rainy night. Next, it was his turn to hunt. Tonight's heavy rain was particularly persistent, accompanied by rolling thunder and lightning, which shrouded the whole mist city in a gloomy atmosphere. More than a dozen practitioners were running freely on the street. Suddenly, a blade suddenly swept out from one side of the eaves, like a galloping lightning, tearing the darkness. The battle broke out, but it came to an end in just dozens of breaths. There were corpses lying on the ground, and everyone's face was full of astonishment, panic, and confusion. Things like this continued to happen in different areas of Mist City in the following time. Bloody, cold, and chilling. An hour later, at the scene of a battle that had just ended, there were 7 or 8 dead bodies lying on the ground. Blood gathered on the ground, thick and scarlet. No matter how the heavy rain washed, it could not dissipate in a short time. Before long, several practitioners came. When they saw the bloody scene, they couldn't help but change their faces and exclaim, "Something's wrong," someone said with a dignified look. Others didn't need to be reminded. They had encountered this situation 5 or 6 times along the way. Every battle scene was bloody and cruel, and no one was left alive. From the beginning to the end, they couldn't judge the trace of the enemy at all. This was too horrible. It had been nearly 3 hours since tonight's action. Originally, they just wanted to deal with a teenager of human gang realm, and they dispatched so many people. It was reasonable to say that it didn't take such a long time at all. But now, 6 hours later, the opponent didn't die. On the contrary, people on their side were dying with hatred. This made the remaining practitioners realize the seriousness of the problem. It was very bad. The strength of the opponent was completely beyond their expectation. It was incredible. Did Lin Sun ask for help from a master? Otherwise, how could he do this with his human gang realm cultivation? Someone said in a trembling voice. Thinking of the scenes tonight, he couldn't help feeling a touch of fear. Everyone else suspected this as well. We can't go on like this. We must report this matter to Child Qi Tianxing as soon as possible. Yes, Lin Sun is too terrible. We can't fight against him at all. We must let those powerful forces send their top overmatches. These practitioners were so scared that their fighting spirit almost collapsed. They didn't dare to act rashly. They decided to retreat first and ask for support before taking action. Whoosh! But just as they were about to leave, a clear sound of saber suddenly sounded in the night not far away, like the sound of death from hell. In an instant, the faces of all practitioners suddenly changed, and they were scared out of their wits. Tied watching pavilion in the brightly lit hall, there were constant discussions. Every representative of the powerful forces was anxious at the moment, like ants on a hot pot, restless. 3 hours had passed since the beginning of the action, but there was still no good news until now. This caused a wisp of a bad premonition to surge into the hearts of many of them. Damn it! A bunch of trash. They just want to kill a teenager of human gang realm, but they haven't succeeded so far. What are they if not trash? Someone couldn't help cursing. 3 hours. More than 100 practitioners set out together, but there is no news until now. It's ridiculous. Other representatives of the powerful forces were also restless. Child Qi, didn't your Azure Light Pavilion send 2 Earth Gang practitioners for this action? Why there is no news until now? Suddenly, someone looked at Qi Tianxing. His words attracted everyone's attention. Qi Tianxing looked gloomy at the moment. He was no longer as calm and composed as before. He was also anxious. Hearing this, he said impatiently, "You ask me? Who should I ask? I remember that the abnormal assassin, Residual Wind, also participated in the action. He still doesn't show up at this time. Has something happened to him?" Someone suddenly mentioned Residual Wind. Qi Tianqing was stunned, and his face became more gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said, "Everyone, you are not here to laugh at Azure Light Pavilion, are you?" Everyone shook their heads. Qi Tianqing snapped, "Since you are not here to laugh at us, shut up. You are anxious, but I am not?" Suddenly, the atmosphere became silent. Many people didn't dare to say more for fear of angering Qi Tianqing. But the anxiety and uneasiness in their hearts were getting stronger and stronger. Bang! At this time, the door was pushed open, and a strong figure came in. It was Chang Henshui, but he looked dignified and frowned at the moment, looking worried. "Child, the situation has changed tonight. I'm afraid the action will end in vain." As soon as he came in, Chang Henshui said in a deep voice. Just a few words made the whole audience burst into an uproar. Even if they had already guessed that there might be changes in this action, they still couldn't believe it when it was confirmed by Chang Henshui. How could it be possible? Can a young man of human gang realm from a poor family defeat the joint action of more than a dozen forces? Nonsense. They are all useless. There was an uproar in the hall. Qi Tianqing was so angry that he slammed the table and roared, "All of you, shut up!" Immediately, he looked at Chang Henshui and said, "Tell me what's going on. If you dare to be alarmist, I will be the first to kill you." Chang Henshui came to report the news with good intentions, but was scolded by Qi Tianqing, a young man from a rich and powerful family, which made him angry. But in order to continue his cultivation in Azure Light Pavilion in the future, he had to bear it and said, "As far as I know, Lu Zhong and Residual Wind are dead, and I'm afraid that more than half of the 173 practitioners who were dispatched tonight have been lost." Before he finished, the hall was in an uproar. Exclamations came from all directions, and everyone was shouting and screaming as if their parents had died. Chapter 219. The main hall was in a mess, filled with noise and clamor. Everyone's face was full of panic and doubt. The news brought back by Chang Henshui was so shocking that they couldn't accept it for a while. A young man in human gang realm. How could he do this? Originally, they all thought that they could easily kill this young man from a poor family with such a large number of people in this action. Unexpectedly, the development of the situation was completely beyond their expectation. Not only did they fail to kill the young man, but they suffered heavy losses. Chang Henshui couldn't help but feel a deep disdain in his heart when he saw these representatives of the rich and powerful families, who used to be dignified and superior, acting like frightened mice. However, Chang Henshui also knew that the background of the rich and powerful forces was extremely terrible. Not every clansman was so unbearable. On the contrary, the real top strongmen and powerful figures often came from the rich and powerful forces. The reason was very simple. Only the rich and powerful forces with great power and massive cultivation resources could cultivate the top strongmen far beyond the ordinary. In contrast, the poor children had already lost innately. Don't panic, everyone. Although the situation is serious, there is still a chance to reverse the situation. Qi Tianqing suddenly spoke in a deep voice, suppressing the panic in the hall and restoring the atmosphere to calm. All eyes looked at Qi Tianqing as if they wanted to know what other tricks he had hidden. Qi Tianqing said with a gloomy face, "We underestimated the terrible strength of our opponent before, which caused such a loss. I think you all know that it's difficult to change anything with our current strength, so there's only one thing we have to do now." He took a deep breath and gritted his teeth. "Ask for help. Ask for help." Everyone in the hall was stunned and their faces changed. It was too shameful to ask for help at this time, and they might even be punished for their incompetence. Everyone, things have developed to this point. If we let Lin Sun leave alive tonight, I believe that from tomorrow on, more than a dozen forces will become the laughingstock of Mist City, and we will never be able to raise our heads again. Qi Tianxing had regained his composure at this moment. Think about it. A young man from a poor family defeated more than a dozen of our forces. What would all the practitioners in Mist City feel if this matter was spread out? Everyone's face changed again. Obviously, they all realized the seriousness of the problem. Well, I'm going to ask for support from the clan. That's the only way. Well, it's not a big deal to lose face. If I can't kill Lin Sun, it will be a big deal. Following this, the representatives from the major factions voiced out one after another to agree with Qi Tianxing's suggestion. At this point, Qi Tianxing breathed a sigh of relief, but he knew very well that even if he killed Lin Sun tonight, the impact would be different. This was no longer a show of power, but a counterattack to save face. What was more, because of the amazing fighting power Lin Sun showed tonight, even if he was killed, it would inevitably cause a shock. Don't forget that Lin Sun was a teenager who was qualified to participate in the province test. Moreover, he possessed such outstanding combat strength. Now that such a young elite had been killed by their forces, what would the upper echelons of the Empire think if news of this were to spread to them? Just thinking about it was enough to know how bad the impact of this matter was. But now that they were riding a tiger, they could only do so. Qi Tianxing only hoped that tonight's matter would end quickly and there would be no more wave. Witnessing all this, Chang Henshui couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. He realized that no matter how powerful Lin Sun was tonight, he could not escape death when these forces sent the real top figures. Was this the fate of the poor? Chang Henshui inexplicably had a touch of pity in his heart. Boom. But when people in the hall were about to take action and ask for support from their respective forces, a loud noise suddenly sounded. The door of the hall was smashed by a huge force, and a young man dressed in black walked in with a straight posture. The teenager was soaked with rain and there were still many scars on his body. The blood stained his black clothes, which made him look a little embarrassed. But his expression was calm and composed. His black eyes were deep and tranquil like an ancient well, and his angular and handsome face even carried a trace of a warm smile. In his hand there was a black saber with many notches on the blade, and there were even traces of blood stains on the blade. But it was this saber that gave the youth an austere, iron-blooded aura. When he walked into the hall, an indescribable killing intent spread out like a cold current, freezing the air in the field. Lin Sun, Qi Tianxing and others were shocked and stopped what they were doing. Their eyes were dilated, and they couldn't believe that the teenager took the initiative to come to them. It was more than audacious. It was simply bullying them. It was too rampant. Even Chang Henshui was stunned and shocked. Lin Sun was too unscrupulous. Did he already hold the idea of fighting to the death and wanted to kill at all costs? Everyone, sorry to keep you waiting, Lin Sun said with a smile. His voice was calm and indifferent, but it made everyone in the hall tremble. Before he came here, Lin Sun had forced a practitioner to tell him that the people gathered in the hall this time were all from more than a dozen forces, and they were not important. They were just representatives with average cultivation. Bastard! How dare you be rampant when you are about to die? A practitioner was furious and felt that his dignity was challenged. Puff! Lin Sun's figure flashed, and his saber cut off the opponent's head in an instant. Blood burst out from the neck like a fountain. Everyone was shocked. No one had expected that the teenager was so powerful that he not only dared to break in alone, but also killed people without saying a word. They didn't even have time to react. They were shocked and angry when they saw the practitioner was killed. Chang Henshui, what are you doing? Kill him! Kill him! Qi Tianxing shouted loudly. Other practitioners fled in panic. Thinking of Lin Sun's achievements tonight, they didn't even dare to have the slightest idea of charging and killing. This was power. Lin Sun seemed to come alone, But before he came, many practitioners had died in his hands, including powerful figures such as Lu Zhong and Residual Wind. Under such circumstances, how could these representatives of powerful forces in the hall, whose cultivation was only mediocre, dare to fight with Lin Sun? Chang Henshui's face changed. He looked at Lin Sun coldly and finally said decisively, "I'm sorry." With a clang, a long spear appeared in his hand. The whole body was dark purple, and the spear tip was shining with frightening cold light. In an instant, Chang Henshui's momentum suddenly changed and rose, like an iron-blooded general who had fought in all directions. Seeing this scene, Qi Tianqing and others all breathed a sigh of relief. With Chang Henshui, a strong man of Earthgang realm, they could at least resist for a while. As long as Chang Henshui could entangle Lin Sun, they would have a chance to escape. But when Lin Sun saw Chang Henshui's long spear, he couldn't help but show a strange look in his eyes. Immediately, he ignored Chang Henshui and rushed to Qi Tianqing and others in the distance with his saber. The purpose of his coming was to kill the representatives of these powerful forces. Only in this way could he give them the heaviest blow. At the same time, it was also a warning that those who chose to be Lin Sun's enemy must pay the cruelest price. Seeing this, Chang Henshui's face darkened. Although he knew that Lin Sun's fighting capacity was extremely amazing, he was angry when Lin Sun completely ignored him. He was a strong man of Earthgang realm. He had been practicing hard, and had become the first among all the followers of Azure Light Pavilion. But now he was ignored by a young man of Humangang realm, which was too irritating. However, just as he was about to act, Lin Sun's voice suddenly sounded in his ears. "If Master Sun knew that you were going to deal with me with the purple spear he refined for you, he would be very disappointed." Chang Henshui was shocked. Master Sun? This guy actually knew Master Sun? Nowadays, in Mist City, those who didn't know the name of Master Sun were simply different. But so far, no one could be sure who Master Sun was. Because Master Sun's identity was extremely mysterious and he had unimaginable attainments in spiritual tattoos, the spiritual weapons refined by him were often the best of the best, far more powerful than the spiritual weapons of the same level sold on the market. So just a few days ago, Chang Henshui also went to the commune of spiritual tattooists and posted a refining task, hoping to refine a satisfactory spiritual weapon for himself with the help of Master Sun. Fortunately, just yesterday, Chang Henshui successfully received the purple spear, which was so powerful that he was extremely satisfied and admired Master Sun's means more and more. But he didn't expect that Lin Sun, a young man from a poor family, seemed to have a relationship with Master Sun. If this was true, it would be amazing. After all, Master Sun's identity was so respected that none of the major forces dared to offend him easily. It was unusual that Lin Sun could have a relationship with Master Sun. Of course, it was not ruled out that Lin Sun was deceiving him under the guise of Master Sun, but Chang Henshui dared not think so. What if Lin Sun really had a relationship with Master Sun? Wait, Lin Sun? Master Sun? They both had the word Sun in their names. It would be too much of a coincidence if there was no relationship between them. For a moment, Chang Henshui struggled and hesitated in his heart, forgetting to take action. At this time, Lin Sun had launched a massacre in the hall. His figure was as fast as lightning. His movements were simple, direct, and neat. Every time he chopped, he would kill a practitioner. His means seemed extremely cruel and ruthless. Many Xiozhi were shocked. They were running, screaming, panicking like stray dogs. But under Lin Sun's targeting, all their struggles seemed to be in vain. There was no other way. The gap between their strength was too great. Although they were both in the Humangang realm, Lin Sun could kill Lu Zhong, a strong man in the Earthgang realm. This was the gap. Chang Henshui, what the fuck are you doing? If I die today, you and the others will die too. Qi Tianqing roared. He was in a precarious situation. At such a critical moment of life and death, Chang Henshui stood there in a daze. How could Qi Tianxing not be angry? P.S. Many students will take part in the college entrance exam tomorrow. Goldfish wishes everyone can be admitted to the university you like. The rock rises with the wind one day and soars up to 90,000 miles. No matter success or failure, you can fight tomorrow and have no regrets. Chapter 220. Chang Henshui was shocked in his heart and suddenly woke up. Only then did he realize that he had just made a big mistake. Even if Lin Sun and Master Sun had something to do with each other, how could he be merciful to Lin Sun at such a moment as a follower of Azure Light Pavilion? In fact, Chang Henshui also knew that the real reason why he hesitated was that he had already given up the idea of dealing with Lin Sun subconsciously. Otherwise, not to mention Master Sun, even if Lin Sun said the name of a more powerful figure, he wouldn't hesitate. Whoosh! Chang Henshui no longer hesitated. With a resolute look, he swept a purple spear in his hand and rushed to Lin Sun in the distance. Earthgang Realm Practitioner's power was totally different. At this moment, Lin Sun felt a chill on his back. Without hesitation, he moved sideways and chopped the spear with his saber. With the rebound force, he suddenly rushed to a practitioner on one side. With a muffled sound, the practitioner had no time to dodge and his head was chopped off in an instant. At this time, Chang Henshui had taken the initiative to attack. A purple spear danced like a raging python with terrible power. Kill him! Kill him! In the distance, Qi Tianxing screamed again and again. The hall was full of blood. There were more than 10 representatives of powerful forces, but now there were only 5 or 6 people left. If Chang Henshui didn't take action in time, the loss would be more serious. Are you sure you want to be my enemy? Lin Sun frowned and transmitted his voice while fighting fiercely with Chang Henshui. The test just now had made him realize that Chang Henshui obviously didn't want to be his enemy, so Lin Sun didn't immediately use his killing move in the battle. Since I'm a follower of Azure Light Pavilion, how can I watch you act violently in front of me? Chang Henshui looked decisive and merciless. He gave full play to the power of Earthgang Realm, which brought a lot of pressure to Lin Sun. In that case, don't blame me for not giving you a chance. The last hesitation in Lin Sun's heart disappeared. His black eyes were like lightning without any emotion. If he didn't kill Chang Henshui as soon as possible, he would only put himself in danger as time went on. However, when Lin Sun was about to use RFS, his eyelids suddenly jumped and a sense of danger rose in his heart. Without hesitation, he flashed and rushed to the distance. Buzz! At practically the exact same moment, an extremely sharp howl resounded. The air was torn apart like a piece of cloth, and one could clearly see an arrow that was gorgeous like a divine ray of light rumbled as it shot over violently from outside the window at the side of the hall. With a bang, the ground where Lin Sun was standing was blown up. The whole tide-watching pavilion shook violently and was on the verge of collapse. Chang Henshui's face suddenly changed. What a terrible arrow! Qi Tianxing and the remaining representatives of the powerful clans were stunned for a moment, and then they couldn't help but feel ecstatic. The reinforcements had arrived. Reinforcements had arrived. However, when they looked at Lin Sun again, they found that Lin Sun had already disappeared in the hall. Damn it! He actually escaped. Qi Tianxing was so angry that his eyes almost popped out. He pointed at Chang Henshui and said, "Chang Henshui, how dare you deliberately let Lin Sun win just now, so that Lin Sun can be fierce here again and again. You will pay for it." Chang Henshui's eyes narrowed, and a touch of anger and killing intent surged uncontrollably in his heart. He couldn't wait to kill Qi Tianxing, the playboy. But in the end, he restrained himself and snorted, "Child Qi, if I didn't help you just now, I'm afraid you would have been killed." After that, he turned around and left. Qi Tianxing trembled with anger and roared, You are just a henchman. You don't know how to admit your mistake. How dare you talk back to me? You are so lawless." "Young Master Qi, that friend is right. If you listen to my advice, you should take your people and leave immediately. We didn't come here just to save you, said the middle-aged man with a smile. Suddenly, a dull, dry and stiff voice came from outside the hall. Qi Tianxing and the remaining representatives of the powerful clans all changed their faces. Wasn't it their reinforcements who helped Lin Sun just now? Who are you? Qi Tianxing gathered up his courage and asked. Rain Tasting Tower. Outside the window, the dry and dull voice said a name and then disappeared completely. Rain Tasting Tower. Qi Tianxing and others were shocked. They should also help Lin Sun. On the street, the rainstorm was like a waterfall, crashing between heaven and earth. The night was still as dark as ink. Occasionally, lightning tore the void and bloomed with dazzling and frightening luster. Ghost Moon casually walked on the street. Her slender and graceful body was completely exposed to the rainstorm, as if she was strolling in the rain with indescribable comfort. She was an assassin of Rain Tasting Tower. Over the years, she had carried out hundreds of missions and only failed a few times. She was known as one of the most dangerous assassins of Rain Tasting Tower. Suddenly, she stopped on the street while she looked towards the row upon row of houses in the distance, and a wisp of a gorgeous smile suffused the corners of her scarlet-red lips. Friend, hiding won't solve the problem. Why don't you come out and have a good fight? Her voice was as pleasant as an oriole's. The rainstorm poured between heaven and earth. Except for the sound of the rain, no one answered for a long time. Ghost Moon seemed to be very patient. She stood there and kept looking at that side. She said, You can't escape. This area has been blocked. Now I can give you a fair chance to fight. If you don't cherish it, then I can only. Before she finished speaking, a chuckle suddenly came from a house in the distance shrouded in rainstorm. Don't talk to me about fairness. You don't deserve it. Ghost Moon pursed her scarlet lips, revealing a wild and coquettish smile. Friend, you've been exposed. Swish. In an instant, her figure left a residual shadow in the void and rushed over there at an incredible speed. But halfway there, her pupils suddenly dilated, as if she had seen something incomparably terrifying, and her coquettish face suddenly changed. Swish. She twisted her body at a jaw-dropping angle and leaped into the air. Her figure suddenly rose high and rushed toward the sky. But at the same time, an illusory and blurry arrow silently flashed by and pierced through his left leg. Puff! Blood spurted out, and Guei Yu's figure suddenly staggered, like a wild goose that had been shot and fell to the ground. This caused Ghost Moon to be shocked in her heart, and she was extremely astounded. What archery technique is this? It's so strange. Relying on her many years of experience in assassinations, Ghost Moon instantly recovered her calm. Before her figure could fall, she suddenly exerted force within her body and dodged to the side like a flickering ray of light. Her archery technique was too strange. It was soundless and impossible to guard against, so Ghost Moon didn't dare attack head-on. Watch out! When Ghost Moon hadn't even arrived beneath the eaves at the side of the street, a hoarse and stiff shout resounded by her ears. It's the Grey Mink! Ghost Moon was horrified in her heart. She successively made over 10 shocking dodging movements, and then she used her body to smash through a wall and charge in. Watch out! But when she'd just flashed into the damaged house, the Grey Mink's voice resounded once more by her ears, and it caused her expression to change while a wisp of astonishment couldn't help but surge into her heart. What exactly is going on? She didn't know because from the beginning until the end, she hadn't been able to catch a trace of danger, and this was the most terrifying part. Ghost Moon suddenly took a deep breath before she dodged once more. She couldn't be bothered about all that any longer, and the important matter at hand was to protect herself. At the same time, she was clearly aware in her heart that the assassination assignment she'd accepted this time was even more dangerous than she'd expected. All of this took a long time to describe, yet it actually occurred in an instant, and it was extremely dangerous. Ghost Moon had become accustomed to all of this since a long time ago. The assassinations she'd carried out in these past few years had allowed her to become accustomed to such a tense and dangerous atmosphere. However, she frowned because the gray mink's voice actually didn't resound again in the following period of time. The gray mink was her companion, and it was skilled in concealment and possessed an innately acute ability to sense danger. In the past few years, the two of them had always carried out assassinations together, and their cooperation was extremely good. Ghost Moon had been able to deal with many lethal dangers by relying on the gray mink's cover. Just like this time, it was similarly the gray mink that had helped her greatly from the shadows. However, unlike the past, the gray mink didn't show itself immediately after it warned her this time, and it seemed as if it had vanished instead. This caused Ghost Moon to faintly feel that something was off. Suddenly, a shrill cry resounded from afar. Ghost Moon's expression changed abruptly. "It's the gray mink!" Swoosh! Without the slightest hesitation, Ghost Moon flashed towards the distance. She couldn't be bothered about any danger. The gray mink had saved her life more than once, so how could she watch helplessly as the gray mink died? Fortunately, she didn't encounter any danger all along the way, but her heart couldn't help but sink when she saw the gray mink. At this moment, the gray mink was lying in a pool of water on the street, and he was barely breathing. His thin and firm face was ghastly pale, whereas there was a horrifying bloody hole on his abdomen, and fresh blood was gurgling out from it. That was the vital point of the Sea of Chi, and it was where the pool of spiritual energy converged. It was the foundation of a cultivator's cultivation, yet now a bloody hole had been pierced through it. Undoubtedly, the gray mink's cultivation had been crippled. Ghost Moon felt her head drone as if she'd been struck by lightning. You don't worry. When that kid attacked earlier, he suffered Boss Residual Snow's counterattack and was heavily injured. Now Boss Residual Snow has already pursued him, and I believe it won't be long before we'll be able to complete this assignment," the gray mink said in a hoarse and dry voice, as if to comfort Ghost Moon, "but I'm afraid I can't act with you in the future." A touch of sadness appeared on Ghost Moon's face. She squatted down and held the gray mink in her arms. She took a deep breath and said, "Tell me, where did that kid go?" Her voice was filled with incomparable hatred. The gray mink grabbed her arm and said, "This is the fate of an assassin. Failure means death. It's good enough for me to keep my life. You've already been injured, so don't be impulsive. Just leave everything to Boss Residual Snow." Ghost Moon still wanted to say something, but the gray mink gritted his teeth and said, Listen to me for once. Our opponent this time is extremely cunning and cruel. If you go, you'll drag Boss Residual Snow down." Ghost Moon's expression changed. She felt hatred and anger in her heart, and she was extremely aggrieved and sad. She said, I'm so unwilling." Suddenly, a rough and lazy voice sounded in the distant rainstorm. "Chick, it's normal to be unwilling. If you die, you won't even have the chance to be unwilling." Who? Chapter 221. In the torrential rain, a tall and majestic figure came over. His appearance was rough, his eyebrows were sparse, his bare chest was as hard as a rock, and he was carrying a huge wine jar in his hand. His eyes were drowsy, just like a drunkard. However, at this moment, when he came over, he was like a mountain walking between heaven and earth with a kind of oppressive and disdainful aura. The heavy rain poured down from the sky, but it dared not approach him at all. This man was Shu Jin. Ghost Moon and Gray Martin felt an inexplicable chill in their hearts. They felt an indescribable oppression, as if they were ants looking up at a towering mountain. A real assassin should not have feelings. Shu Jin's gaze swept across the two of them. He seemed to have thought of something. He sighed and said, "You two can leave. Go back and ask your master if he still remembers Tsang Mountain Blood at sunset." Ghost Moon and Gray Martin looked at each other, hesitated for a moment, and finally gritted their teeth and left in a hurry. Shu Jin watched them leave, and suddenly a smile appeared on his lips. He carried the wine jar and drank wildly in the heavy rain. Bang! The wine was finished and the jar was broken. Shu Jin let out a long breath, and his eyes suddenly looked into the distance. At this moment, his drowsy eyes suddenly flashed with a terrifying electric light, as if a pair of thunder vortexes were surging. Almost at the same time, in the darkness far away, a light voice suddenly sounded, and then a thin and slender figure walked out and approached in the blink of an eye. This person was dressed in a black, wide-sleeved robe and had 3 wisps of willow whiskers on his chin. He had the demeanor of an immortal, and every movement he made seemed to connect with the heavens. His gaze seemed indifferent, but a casual sweep of his gaze revealed a shocking power that caused one's heart to tremble. "May I ask who you are, my friend?" The man's temperament was as deep as an abyss. He stood 300 meters away and looked at Shu Jin from afar. The heavy rain between heaven and earth seemed to be imprisoned by an invisible force, and could no longer get close to this area of 300 meters. Shu Jin smiled. "It doesn't matter who I am. What's important is that you, Yao Tuahai, actually want to fight with a junior tonight, which really surprised me." The sage-like man was Yao Tuahai. If Lin Sun were here and saw such a scene, it was unknown what he would think in his heart. But Yao Tuahai's face darkened, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. In fact, he was a little surprised. He didn't know Shu Jin's identity, but from his aura, he smelled a terrifying power that didn't belong to him at all. "Are you here to stop me?" Yao Tuahai probed. Shu Jin laughed and said, "Do you think you are qualified to make me do this? Enough with the nonsense. Tonight's matter is more or less over. It's time to wrap things up. If you don't think it's enough, then you'll have to go through me first." Yao Tuahai narrowed his eyes. "Are you here to protect Lin Sun?" Shu Jin scratched his head and said, "I guess so." Hearing this, Yao Tuahai's heart sank. He never thought that Lin Sun had a strong protector who was not inferior to Tao Insight Realm. Yao Tuahai took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "In this case, I'm very curious whether you can protect him." As a famous cultivator in the southwestern province, who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Governor Lu Wujuan, Yao Tuahai would naturally not be frightened by a sentence. Shu Jin frowned and seemed to be a little impatient. He said, "I know that no matter how much nonsense you talk, it's better to solve it with fists." Before he could finish his sentence, he took a big step forward and threw out a punch. Boom! It was a simple punch, but it seemed to have pierced through the void, and it revealed an unstoppable and majestic aura. It could be clearly seen that the void in this area was squeezed severely and collapsed inch by inch, producing a sharp and harsh sonic boom that made the world pale. Yao Tuahai's face changed slightly, and dazzling cyan light suddenly gushed out of his body and rushed straight to the sky, making his power rise to the extreme in an instant. Buzz almost at the same time, he clasped his 5 fingers and condensed a handprint. The cyan light was flowing, dazzling, and he slapped it out fiercely. At this moment, in the governor's mansion, Lu Wujuan, who was concentrating on cultivation, suddenly opened his eyes, and a touch of surprise flashed between his eyebrows. In Mist College, Wei Lingzhen, who was playing chess, and Du Dongtu, the commander of Xiling army, all felt something. They stopped what they were doing and looked in the same direction. In the rain-enjoying tower, Ting Yu, who was sitting cross-legged and playing the zither alone, played an imperceptible noise with his fingertips. But he seemed to be unaware of it and frowned at the distance outside the window. On a stormy night, there were strong practitioners of Tao Insight Realm fighting in Mist City? This thought flashed in the hearts of Lu Wujuan, Wei Lingzhen, Du Dongtu, Ting Yu and others, which made them all surprised. There were strong practitioners of Tao Insight Realm participating in the battle tonight? But when they tried to perceive something, they found nothing, as if it was just an illusion and nothing had happened. They couldn't help but be surprised and bewildered by this. At the same time, on the long street, there was a loud bang, and the terrible and dazzling light scattered like a wanton storm. But between heaven and earth, there seemed to be an invisible wall blocking all the wanton spread of power. As a result, the buildings around the street were preserved in perfect condition. Otherwise, according to the power released by this blow, at least all the buildings, creatures, and lives within 100 miles would be destroyed. Boom! In the void, Yao Tuahai staggered back. His whole body was overflowing with green light, which was incomparably blazing. Obviously, he had urged his cultivation to the extreme. In front of him, a fist light rushed to him, oppressing the void to collapse, full of an unparalleled momentum to crush everything. This was the punch that Shu Jin had just punched. Just one blow had smashed Yao Tuahai's palm print and forced him to stagger back. And until this moment, Yao Tuahai had not been able to completely resolve the power of this punch. What especially made Yao Tuahai's heart palpitate was that after Shu Jin's punch, he still had enough power to lock in all directions, preventing the power of their battle from spreading out. Who the hell is this guy? Yao Tuahai was shocked. He had reached the Tao Insight realm for decades, and he thought that in the whole southwest province, there were only a few people who could compete with him. Who would have thought that the strange man he saw tonight would suppress him to the point where he almost couldn't hold on with just one punch? From this, it could be judged that the strange man's cultivation and combat effectiveness were at least one level higher than his. Or even more. Boom, the fist light was still rushing forward. It was simple and there was nothing dazzling or shocking about it, but the kind of momentum that crushed everything and pressed forward was so terrible. Bang! In the end, Yao Tuahai was actually unable to resist this punch, and it forcefully smashed onto his chest. His entire body instantly felt as if it was crushed by a divine mountain, and his figure was blasted flying while he coughed up large mouthfuls of blood without end. His countenance had already become ghastly pale while his eyes were filled with shock. He'd lost his calm and sage-like appearance from before, and he seemed to be in a rather sorry state. Clatter at this time, a rough smile appeared on Shu Jin's lips, and he gently pressed his hands in the void. Suddenly, the violent power between heaven and earth was erased, and the world returned to its original appearance. The heavy rain poured down as if nothing had happened just now. This scene could be described as turning the rotten into the magical, incredible. Yao Tuahai looked at this scene in a daze, and his pale face changed constantly. He looked at Shu Jin in the distance with a deep fear in his eyes. Who on earth was this man? Just one punch could make the world change color, and it was full of unscrupulous and domineering momentum. In the whole empire, there seemed to be few practitioners of Tao Insight realm who had such means. I have no intention of interfering in the grievances between you and Lin, but in this mist city, no one can deal with him under my eyes. After saying this, Shu Jin turned around and strode away. His majestic figure soon disappeared in the vast curtain of rain. Yao Tuahai was shocked. What did this sentence mean? He was a little uncertain. He pondered alone in the rain for a long time, and finally turned away with a gloomy face. Tonight's encounter was so abrupt that Yao Tuahai also had a touch of fear in his heart. He dared not take other actions rashly. At this time, in the depths of a remote and dilapidated street, Lin soon curled up his body and lay quietly in the shadow of a low house. He restrained his breath and let the rain wash him like a lifeless stone. At this moment, his face was slightly pale, and most of his strength had been consumed. What was more serious was that there was a shocking bloody hole on the left side of his chest, which almost pierced his heart. This was left by residual snow, an assassin from Tingyu Tower. When dealing with Ghost Moon and Grey Martin, Lin forced Ghost Moon to dodge and seek self-protection with the insignificant bow in his hand. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Lin finally locked on Grey Martin, who was hiding in another place, and shot an arrow through the ocean of chi of Grey Martin without hesitation. But Lin never thought that when he locked on Grey Martin, he was also locked on by residual snow, who was hiding on the other side. Almost at the same time, Lin had no time to dodge and was seriously injured. In this case, Lin had to choose to escape. Tonight's fierce battle had lasted until now, which had consumed a lot of his energy. In addition, he was seriously injured, so Lin could only seek self-protection. Unexpectedly, residual snow was chasing him all the way like a maggot attached to a bone, and Lin couldn't get rid of him at all. This situation was very dangerous. If he continued to escape like this, the first one to fall down would inevitably be the seriously injured Lin. Therefore, Lin chose to fight back without hesitation. He didn't know who residual snow was, but it was very clear that this guy had extremely terrible attainments in archery, which was even stronger than residual wind. This kind of opponent was undoubtedly the most difficult and dangerous to deal with. Fortunately, Lin had insignificant bow. After 1 year of training in Bloodthirsty Camp, he also mastered the assassination and stealth skills that were not inferior to residual snow. Therefore, in the stormy night, Lin Sun and residual snow launched a tit-for-tat assassination silently. Chapter 222. Lin Sun's hidden figure seemed to have no breath like a rock, but inside his body, the nature insight and spirit devour scripture was running slowly. He was seriously injured and his physical strength was also greatly consumed. When he hid before, he had swallowed a whole bottle of sapphire gang refining pills. At this moment, with the running of the nature insight and spirit devour scripture, the huge efficacy of the pills was constantly refined to supplement the lost strength in his body. But this could only solve the urgent problem. The key was that the injury caused by the bloody hole in his chest was too serious to be healed in a short time. Therefore, the longer he delayed, the more dangerous it would be for Lin Sun. But his opponent this time was an extremely experienced and ruthless assassin. To kill such a person, patience and strength were the key. Lin Sun had no time to deal with him patiently. Whoosh! Suddenly, Lin Sun took a deep breath and arched his body quietly. This subtle movement made him expose a trace of power fluctuation. Boom! Almost at the same time, in the darkness in the distance, a snow-like arrow burst out and swept towards Lin Sun fiercely. A terrible whistling sound broke through the air, which was soul-stirring. Lin Sun's figure flashed, and he suddenly turned over and rushed to the distance. The eaves where he was originally was shattered in a roar. The northwest corner is still 1,900 zhang away. An accurate judgment flashed through Lin Sun's mind. His figure didn't stop at all and kept flashing forward in the rainstorm night. The fighting characteristics of his opponent this time were very obvious, which was stability. Regardless of whether it was his stealth or the speed and strength of his attacks, he maintained an extraordinary level of stability. From the beginning until the end, he didn't reveal a single flaw. Undoubtedly, it was the most terrible thing to be targeted by such an enemy. As long as there was a little carelessness, the opponent would seize the opportunity to carry out a fatal blow. Just like the attack just now, when Lin Sun made a move, he was sure that the opponent would definitely attack and keep a distance of 9,000 feet. Obviously, within this distance, the opponent could fully exert the most powerful means of attack. If he was not injured, Lin Sun was confident that he could deal with him and see whose assassination skill was more powerful. But now he could only keep dodging and escaping, and then look for the best opportunity to attack in the process. There was no other way. With his current strength, he could only use the power of insignificant bow once again. No more than that. In other words, for Lin Sun, there was only one chance to kill this opponent tonight. If he failed, he would lose the ability to counterattack. While Lin was dodging, a figure was also moving forward in the night. His figure was like a wisp of smoke, constantly shuttling between the streets and eaves, silent and ethereal like a ghost. Although his speed was not fast, he maintained a constant rhythm. This person was Residual Snow, a top assassin from the Tingyu Tower, who had the powerful cultivation of the Heaven Gang realm. Residual Snow was known as the ace assassin of Rain Listening Tower because he had never failed once in the assassination mission carried out by him. At this moment, he was carrying a strange rattan bow on his back and a bowl-sized quiver on his waist. The quiver was filled with neatly arranged arrows. The numerous arrows were completely dark green in color, and the tips of the arrows revealed the shape of leaves. The bodies of the arrows were branded with specks of snow-white starlight, and they seemed as if they were embedded with numerous tiny stars, causing them to be extremely strange. The rattan bow was called Snow Mud Spiritual Bow. It was a top-grade spiritual weapon of human rank, refined by a spiritual tattoo master himself. It was an extremely precious and rare treasure, which had been passed down for hundreds of years. The matching arrows were called Big Claw Spiritual Arrows. Each arrow was engraved with a unique spiritual tattoo pattern and contained terrible power. An arrow like this was worth about 500 imperial silver coins. With the strength and archery skills possessed by Residual Snow, he could exert unimaginable power with this set of bows and arrows. But when carrying out the task tonight, Residual Snow couldn't help frowning. His opponent was just a teenager of human gang realm, but his combat effectiveness was unexpectedly strong. It was the fourth time that he attacked tonight, but he still failed to kill Lin, which made Residual Snow feel serious. Through the fight, Residual Snow had clearly realized that this teenager named Lin was really unusual. Lin seemed to be embarrassed and had to dodge all the way, but he didn't leave any flaw from beginning to end. What surprised Residual Snow most was that although he could capture Lin's breath from beginning to end, as long as he was about to lock on Lin, Lin would avoid him all at once, so he couldn't find the best time to attack. This was incredible! It was the first time that Residual Snow had met such a difficult opponent since he carried out the task. The most terrible thing was that this opponent was just a teenager of human gang realm, and he could still avoid his targeting and attacks again and again when he was seriously injured. This series of discoveries made Residual Snow involuntarily admire him. It was really hard to imagine where this young man came from and why his fighting skills were so brilliant. But the more it was like this, the more determined Residual Snow was to kill Lin. Although he had no grievance with Lin, he was an assassin. His responsibility was to kill Lin and complete the task. This was the basic integrity that an assassin must have. Suddenly, a cold light flashed in Residual Snow's eyes, and he noticed that the opponent lurked again. Whoosh! He found the best position to hide in a flash, grabbed the Snow Mud Spiritual Bow, and put a Big Claw Spiritual Arrow on the bowstring. His movements were as smooth as flowing water, completed in one go. Almost at the same time, a dangerous breath like a sharp blade pierced Residual Snow's eyes, and he knew that the opponent was capturing his breath. This caused a wisp of a teasing arc to arise on the corners of his mouth. Has this little fellow finally lost his patience? Residual Snow quietly exerted strength on his fingertips, pulled the bowstring to the fullest, and waited for the moment. He had absolute confidence that he could kill the opponent first at the moment when the opponent locked him. But what made Residual Snow frown was that the opponent soon gathered his breath, and the dangerous breath disappeared. It seemed that he was going to escape again. "You will lose your life if you hesitate," Residual Snow murmured in his heart. He was ready to get up and chase after Lin as before. However, right at this instant, he suddenly noticed that a trace of an imperceptible fluctuation of aura had suddenly appeared in his opponent's extremely well-concealed figure 900 m away. Opportunity! With his many years of assassination experience, Residual Snow immediately judged that the opponent should have an accident at this moment, and it was very likely that his physical strength had been unable to support. This was definitely not a means of luring the enemy, because no one would be stupid enough to expose his breath to lure the enemy, which was no different from courting death. Bang! In an instant, Residual Snow had made a decision. A Big Claw Spiritual Arrow suddenly burst out, like a bright divine rainbow, rushing through the rainy night, flowing with dazzling light. Lin soon did have an accident which caught him off guard. He was originally hiding himself and looking for an opportunity to counterattack, yet never had he imagined that before he could finish doing all this, he felt his right palm tremble abruptly. Although this movement was extremely subtle, it was the most fatal flaw at such a dangerous time. Lin soon couldn't help narrowing his eyes and cursing inwardly. Almost subconsciously, he was about to dodge, but then something unexpected happened. A fiery red luster suddenly rushed out from the center of his right palm, turning into a round and soft sphere, the surface of which seemed to be burning with flames. Soon after, a pair of round eyes opened on the surface of the sphere, a round nose protruded out, and a round mouth opened to reveal a pair of round ears. Chirp! Lin Sun's eyes widened at once. He never thought that Chirp, who had been sleeping for several months, would suddenly wake up at such a critical moment. Immediately, Lin Sun's heart thumped, and a cold feeling of extreme danger surged in his heart. It was like a sharp knife which stimulated Lin Sun's pores. In his field of vision, a bright light was suddenly enlarging. Damn it! Lin Sun's face was livid. Almost instinctively, he wanted to hold Chirp and block the blow with his own body. Chirp! But right at this critical moment, Chiuchiu suddenly let out a cheer, and then its figure flashed before it suddenly opened its mouth and swallowed that wisp of snow-white light. Lin Sun was stunned at once. At this time, it was Chirp who blocked the blow for him? Lin Sun was shocked, but before he could react, he saw Chirp's round and soft body bouncing up and down on the ground like a ball that had been shaken away. Chirps kept making cheering sounds, as if it was fun to do so. This Lin Sun felt a little confused. That was an extremely powerful and lethal arrow, but it was actually eaten by Chiuchiu in a single bite. And from the looks of it, Chiuchiu seemed to be very happy. Immediately, Lin Sun suddenly woke up. There was no time to explore all this. He suddenly pulled the insignificant's bow and aimed at the distance. At this time, it was the best time to fight back. Residual Snow had planned to pack up his things and leave 1,900 meters away. After all, he was confident that Lin Sun had no chance to survive under that arrow. Who would have thought that at the last moment, one of his great claw spiritual arrows would be swallowed by a little monster that looked like a ball? That was the most powerful arrow shot by him through the snow-mud spirit bow, which was worth 500 silver coins and was used by him with all his essence, chi, and spirit. It was powerful enough to kill a Heaven Gang realm practitioner. But now it was actually swallowed by a little thing like a ball. How could this be possible? Even with Residual Snow's rock-hard state of mind, he couldn't help but have a fluctuation at this moment. His pupils dilated as if he had seen a ghost. This unforeseen event happened too quickly, so quickly that he wondered if the heavens were playing a joke on him.